Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Ann Olson, the Environmental Program Coordinator at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. Before we begin today's competition, I'd like to provide you all with a few announcements. Today's events will include presentations from several teams: University of Baltimore School of Law, University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, and the University of Miami School of Law. Our panel of judges will listen to each team as they provide a 30-minute presentation. Judges will then have 15 minutes to ask questions of each team immediately following. After the presentations of all three finalist teams, judges will adjourn to separate Zoom breakout rooms to deliberate and select a winning team. To learn more about the hack competition and previous competitions in the past, please visit the link provided in the chat below. Lastly, I'd like to recommend that you all turn off your cameras and keep your volume on mute while you are not speaking. Thank you all again for joining us. We will begin the competition momentarily. And at this time, I would like to invite Professor Katie Q, Haub Distinguished Professor of Environmental Law, to please turn her camera on.
Welcome everyone to the 2021 Environmental Law and Policy Hack. I'm excited to see everyone. The hack competition identifies an environmental challenge and invites law student anchored teams to brainstorm solutions that are innovative, but also realistic, reflecting the team's knowledge of law, science, and policy. The focus of the competition is on finding solutions. There are no limits on collaboration. Coaches can provide substantive support, and at the end of the day, the winning team gets funding to support their project. This year's problem focuses on an environmental challenge that resists easy solution, the nutrient pollution of waterways. We've asked teams to develop innovative solutions to reduce nutrient pollution in a specific water body or watershed. Teams from around the country submitted written proposals, which are available on our website. I'd like to congratulate the teams and coaches from the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, the University of Baltimore School of Law, and University of Miami School of Law, whose proposals were selected for presentation in the final round. The run of show today is that our judges will listen to the teams provide their presentations, have 15 minutes after each team presents to ask questions. The judges will then retire to a breakout room to deliberate. During that time, I'll stay on and I'll invite questions from the audience and moderate a conversation with our participants about their experience. So I'd like to start by thanking all of our participants this year for contributing your time and energy to help think about the knotty problem of nutrient pollution. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace Law School who volunteered to grade briefs. I'd like to thank my colleagues at Chinthi Vithanagay and Annie Olson for all of their work behind the scenes to bring the logistics together. And most importantly, I'd like to thank our incredible judges for being so generous in donating your time today. I don't mean to make our presenters nervous, but we have assembled a panel of judges with extraordinary expertise relating to the control of nutrient pollution and protection of water quality. Our first judge, David Cantor, is an associate professor of environmental studies at NYU. His research focuses on the control of nitrogen pollution, including how it intersects with food security and sustainable development. And he recently contributed to a report proposing an international nitrogen management system. Peter Lehner is managing attorney at Earth Justice. He directs Earth Justice's Sustainable Food Farming program, which in part helps to develop strategies to reduce environmental harms from the agricultural system. But he's also a legend in New York environmental law, former executive director at NRDC. And in his time at NRDC, he directed the Clean Water Program. I'm also told that he is the person we can thank for our wonderful drinking water in New York City, as his cases protecting the city's drinking water have been instrumental in developing the city's current watershed protection program. Sarah Matsumoto is an assistant professor at Willamette University College of Law. Before joining academia, she represented plaintiffs in environmental citizen suits at a firm in Eugene, Oregon, where she was part of a legal team that brought the first successful RCRA citizen suit against a confined animal feeding operation for polluting groundwater through its improper management of waste. And she also recently published an article focused on how to fill gaps in the law to better address surface and groundwater pollution from CAFOs. And finally, my good friend and colleague, Margot Pollins, is the faculty director of the PACE NRDC Food Law Initiative, author of I think the country's first casebook on food law and policy, and she regularly teaches agricultural law and the environment at PACE. So as I said, deep expertise on the issues relating to water pollution and nutrient management, and we're very thankful to have these incredible judges with us. I see that I have, as 20 years of teaching evaluations attest, spoken very quickly, and we're now ahead of schedule. I don't know if, do you think, do we want to start 3 minutes early with our first presentation?
Well, let's just confirm that all the students are there. So
okay, so maybe we should do a roll call. Do I have here, are the members, our first team we're going to hear from is the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, represented by Samantha Fairbanks, Alexis Smith, and Gabriella Warner, and coached by Bill Permate. Do we have everyone here who's presenting from the University of Maryland?
Hello, yes, we are all here.
You're all here. Okay, well, I think that's maybe a green light to go then. All right, I'll turn the floor over. Congratulations again and welcome. We're very excited to hear from you, and the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, it's saying we are disabled from screen sharing.
Now it's so good we have those extra 2 minutes.
Chesapeake Bay Watershed. More specifically, the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Before we dive in, here's a quick overview of what we are presenting today, including our introduction, the regulatory structure, our policy proposal, and use of award money. So first, the problem. The issue we are discussing today is termed nutrient pollution. But what is nutrient pollution? It is when nutrients, most often nitrogen and phosphorus, will run into the watershed through erosion and runoff. It will ultimately accumulate in the main waterway, and then as these concentration builds, it will stimulate an algal growth, since these nutrients are normally limiting growth agents. As the algae continues to grow, it'll consume the excess nitrogen and phosphorus and grow until there's no longer enough nutrients to sustain it, in which case the bloom will die. Through the natural decomposition process, the bacteria will decrease oxygen levels and increase the carbon dioxide levels in the water. This will result in a reduction or sometimes complete removal of oxygen. These areas are often labeled as dead zones, and this overall process is often labeled eutrophication. The main source of these nutrients are synthetic fertilizers, whose worldwide use has increased substantially since 1910. For our solution, we have chosen to focus on the Chesapeake Bay, a major estuary in our own backyard. The bay covers portions of 6 states and is home to 18 million people. Nutrient pollution is a large problem in the Chesapeake Bay, with around 300 million pounds of excess nitrogen entering the bay every year. There are several sources of this pollution, as you can see. However, the most prominent is agriculture, as it contributes 40% of the nitrogen and 50% of the phosphorus load entering the bay. Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania are entrenched in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and contain around 87,000 family-owned farms alone. To monitor the bay's health, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has created a State of the Bay Health Index, with a score of 100 being the state of the bay back in the 1600s. Today, we are at a 32. Which has decreased since our score in 2018. Specifically in regards to nitrogen, phosphorus, and oxygen content, we are not doing so well, with an F, D, and C, respectively, despite the fact that these areas have actually improved since our 2018 score. There are 3 agricultural hotspots in the Chesapeake Bay, and we are specifically focusing on the Shenandoah Valley. This area has a unique geologic makeup that makes it the perfect farmland. With that, they also contribute 42% of the nitrogen and 50% of the phosphorus load to the bay. As you can see highlighted in yellow, the Shenandoah Valley is a large tributary in the bay system. As previously mentioned, agriculture contributes to water health in numerous ways, including animal waste, synthetic nutrients as already addressed, entering through erosion and runoff, which is prompted by monoculture vegetation. So, what can be done? Right now, there are currently 2 methods in place to manage nutrient pollution. The total maximum daily load, or TMDLs, will be discussed later on, but they are created by the EPA and are dedicated to reducing nutrient influx by 2025. Based on our 2017 numbers, reductions still have to be made. There are also best management practices, or BMPs, which are methods purposely designed to reduce water pollution in the Shenandoah Valley specifically has over 50 listed for their area. So we believe that the key to the Bay success, and thus the key to our proposal, are riparian buffers. Riparian buffers are a culmination of a variety of local plants along the edge of a waterway to prevent nutrient runoff. As the nutrients enter into the buffer, the bacteria will use the nitrogen as an energy source and convert it to gas. The plant roots will uptake the nutrients, and the sheer surface area of the vegetation will catch the sediment. The benefit to the buffer are significant. However, they are very, very helpful as they do allow for a nutrient runoff and sediment deposits to decrease significantly, and they filter water 2 to 8 times more effectively. I will now pass you along to my colleague, Alexis.
Hi, so I will be discussing the governing regulatory structure for the federal level. This area of the watershed is governed by the Clean Water Act. Agricultural runoff pollution is considered to be a non-point source. Non-point sources are defined by the Clean Water Act as any source that is not a point source. So the term point source is any discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance from which pollutants are or may be discharged. This term does not include agricultural stormwater discharges and return flows from irrigated agriculture. The last part of the definition is the most relevant to the topic of phosphorus and nitrogen emissions into the watershed. Each state is required to designate uses for water bodies, and under the Clean Water Act, Section 303D explains that each state must provide a list of impaired waters that are not able to meet current water quality standards for the designated uses by using traditional measures such as technology-based regulations or controls. This list must be ranked according to priority. So the Chesapeake Bay watershed uses Tmdls. According to the EPA, a Tmdl is a calculation of the maximum amount of pollutant allowed to enter a water body, and so that it will meet and continue to meet current water quality standards for pollutants. A Tmdl determines the pollutant reduction target and allocates the load reductions needed. So how does this all come together? According to the Clean Water Act, each state must develop Tmdls for waters identified on their impaired water lists. So why is the Chesapeake Bay so special? The EPA itself came up with the Tmdls for the Chesapeake Bay because it's a huge body of water. It's the largest nutrient diet ever done so far and incorporates multiple states. The Clean Water Blueprint are efforts enacted in late 2010 that incorporates all of the states in the Bay. And the goal is for all 6 states to cooperate and reduce bay loads for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment overall. So this chart shows that the Chesapeake Bay watershed states are making progress, but not enough nearly to meet its goals. As far as Virginia is concerned, Virginia is in the red to meet its goals. This means that for nitrogen and phosphorus, specifically agricultural, is more than 25% off of its target, or pollution is increasing. So in order for Virginia to meet its target Tmdl goals by 2025, they must reduce its phosphorus by almost half and nitrogen and sediment by almost a third, which provides a very big problem and a challenge. So how are we doing so far? As you can see, not that great. Policies thus far haven't been as effective as intended to be. So there's problems with both implementation and enforcement problems. Firstly, there's issues with multi-state cooperation. Specifically, different states have different approaches when it comes to BMPs. So the EPA strongly suggests the use of best management practices to regulate non-point source pollutions, as well as creating federal grant programs for states to implement these practices. The issue here is that these best management practices are completely voluntary. States are not required to come up with an explicit plan on how to meet and implement Tmdls through non-point sources, just assure that they're going to do so and track their overall effectiveness. Furthermore, there hasn't been much updates to the impaired water list. So under the Clean Water Act, states are required to submit their list for EPA approval every 2 years. So this is not being done in a timely fashion in accordance to the rules. For Virginia, for Virginia, for example, the last impaired water list from Virginia came out in 2016 and was approved in 2018, so over 5 years ago. Further, there's been a lack of enforcement. So in 2020, Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., along with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, filed suit in federal district court against the EPA, accusing them for violation of the Clean Water Act by failing to enforce the Chesapeake Bay pollution reduction limits for Pennsylvania and New York. These states are saying that by failing to enforce efforts to restore the bay's water quality, it will likely fail. Therefore, the EPA must hold states accountable for doing their part in reducing pollutants. Further, NPs are not, NIPDs are not applicable here. So load allocations are not measured by NIPDs, and thus they have no limits. So the Clean Water Act establishes a framework for enforcement of Tmdls called NIPDs, or the National Pollution Discharge Elimination Program, which requires permits for any point sources. So since load allocations are not point sources, they're not covered by the NIPDs program, and thus they have no permits, and you can't obtain percent reduction targets. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Samantha.
Hi. So the governing regulatory structure in the area is quite limited. The only current legislation for best management practices is known as House Bill 1422. It was signed into law in early 2020, and it mandates nutrient management plans and livestock exclusion practices as a way to meet Virginia's TMDL reductions. In an attempt to motivate farmers to implement these measures voluntarily, the bill does not take effect until July 2026. Virginia has up until December 31st, 2025 to repeal the legislation if significant progress towards the goal has been made. However, at this time, it is not predicted that Virginia is going to meet their goals. Some barriers to legislation include funding for cost share programs and mandates forcing early retirement. So cost share programs are designed to burden farmers with less than 30% of the cost. However, they are consistently underfunded, they require upfront payment, then refund the landowner, and they do not cover any sort of repairs or upkeep, which is extremely important for BMPs that have more structural components. With the rising age of the average farmer, which is currently around 60, the cost burden of legislation may force farmers into early retirement, which is not what we want to do for our local small farmers. Some alternatives to legislation do include increasing cost share funding, the Virginia Crep program, which we'll talk about next, and encouraging more properties to enter into easements, which provides bonus tax incentives, and that's what our policy is focused around. So the Virginia Crep program is a voluntary program where the state will rent land around stream banks for riparian buffers. It's a voluntary program. It is limited in duration, and it provides some incentives in the form of tax credits, cost reimbursements, and bonus incentive payments, which are on the screen. Some downsides of the program is that it only lasts on average 10 to 15 years. There is a buyout option, and often sale of land will include this buyout option. Buyout normally includes paying for the benefits that you received, as well as potentially punitive damages. However, the federal CRP programs is currently offering a waiver if you're selling that to younger agriculturalists. While that is counteracting one issue that the community has, it doesn't help at all when it comes to conservation and nutrient management. So another option is conservation easements. These are perpetual contractual agreements. In Virginia, they're with approved private or public land trust organizations. They traditionally encompass the entire property, and they're designed to protect agricultural use, open space, natural resources, biodiversity, and historic preservation. Easements prevent subdivision. They often implement land use restrictions while also allowing people to still continue their agricultural use, and usually require the implementation of upkeep of best management practices. The federal tax incentives are governed by the Internal Revenue Code 170H, and the statute for public easements in Virginia is the Virginia Open Space Lands Act, and the private statute is Virginia Conservation Easement Act. So our policy proposal focuses around these conservation easements. We are looking to implement 100-foot wide stream buffer easements. This 100-foot wide buffer can reduce sediment by 97%, nitrogen by 80%, and phosphorus by 77%. These are all three the nutrient loads that are targeted by the Bay TMDL, and the nitrogen and phosphorus is what we're talking about today. Some benefits of riparian buffers as conservation easements include nutrient reduction, but it also incorporates the permanent nature and contractual enforceability of easements. It provides small cost incentives, but minimizes the deterrent of placing your entire property under an easement. It's also non-exclusive with any other program, and it will aid with the affordability of House Bill 1422. Some similar programs is it does piggyback off the Crep program. And while we were doing this research, we actually found out that Pennsylvania has a similar program, which allows landowners to put their land under a 35 to 50 foot buffer. One thing that is really interesting for the TMDL barriers is that all of these other states, especially Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, are facing the same issues, but they're attacking it through different means. So whereas Pennsylvania is already offering this program, when we're looking at Virginia and we're looking at Maryland, this isn't a thing that we could actually do yet. As for feasibility, one of the major benefits of discovering there are similar programs is that our idea is not only feasible, but is within reach in the next year or so. There are no statutory barriers to these limited easements. And in fact, upwards of 20 years ago, some private organizations did offer these partial easements. However, there are still a few yet achievable barriers. First, the legal cost to write an easement is similar for 2 or 200 acres, yet the payout is nowhere near the same. So to achieve the legal costs for the landowners, we are looking to help a willing land trust organization apply for grant funding to cover the cost. We are currently looking at the Innovative Nutrient and Sediment Reduction Grant Program. Additionally, like riparian buffer Crep programs and easements, once written, these can be more of a forum agreement rather than the extremely personalized nature of full property easements. Finally, the cost of BMPs up front, like always, is going to be a burden to the landowner. However, interested landowners are likely going to be able to organize tree planting events through the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and look for other cost share programs to aid with these costs. So why do we need all three of these options? Our idea specifically is a new and potentially revolutionary tool. First off, none of these programs exclude a landowner from using multiple at the same time. They all allow the flexibility and the customization for what a landowner needs. For one example, if a landowner has a reason to not want to use the Crep rental program, but they are willing to place their property under easement where they feel they may maintain more control, they are able to do so. Additionally, no program completely covers all of the necessary costs, and funding for certain cost share programs frequently does run out. By entering into multiple programs, the cost is distributed among various programs rather than a single place. Additionally, it minimizes the out-of-pocket cost in the landowner, which is extremely integral to preserving our local agricultural business. There are also no cost share programs to aid with the upkeep of fencing or riparian BMPs, and placing already conserved land under easement guarantees these extra cost incentives to the landowner. Debatably, this is our most significant barrier to legislation and BMPs, being able to afford what happens if the actual thing gets damaged. Finally, and the reason we began our investigation of this idea is that these are going to be perpetual in nature, unlike any other program. For the foreseeable future, all this land that would be put under easement must remain under easement with the required BMPs forever. If we do win, we would like to use the award money for education. We believe that education is the best way to incite change. We hope to split the money between organizations such as the Shenandoah Riverkeepers, the local Young Farmers Chapter, and hopefully the Maryland Environmental Law Society. The local Young Farmers Chapter has already started recent local education initiatives through the Blue Ridge Community College, so we would like to fit into this existing structure. As for content, we would like to work with these organizations to come up with this education plan. The Valley agricultural community is already extremely well connected, and it is rare that you will find a farmer who doesn't know about BMPs and cost share. However, it is not rare that you'll find one who refuses to participate due to a distaste that some landowners do have for conservation programs, especially with the Mennonite farmer population in the area. These education programs are focused at some of these hesitations rather than just a general education. This would include an overall distaste of working with the government, kind of trying to counteract the perceived risks of easements, giving assistance with technical process of the programs, and then also making awareness of this buffer-only option. We also hope to look into partnering with organizations such as the Valley Conservation Council, which is a small land trust organization that holds easements, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, who have a large footprint in the area, and local soil and water conservation districts, such as the Shenandoah Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. If this is properly structured, we truly believe that every party involved will benefit from this policy. Not only does it work along other programs for affordability and feasibility, It provides nutrient management, but it also works to alleviate the financial burdens on our agriculturalists. It is permanent in nature, and so we don't need to worry about this idea only being able to be implemented for a certain amount of time. And it really aids with the burden that is imposed by the upcoming livestock exclusion legislation and any potential legislation from there. Once again, if we do win, we would like to split the award money for education programs between the Shenandoah Riverkeeper, young farmers, and the Maryland Environmental Law Society. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. Can you turn off your screen share if you don't mind for the question period? Thank you. And we have Gabriella. Oh, we have all three of you back. Okay. Well, I'll just jump right in. I have just to start some clarification questions about the proposal. Could you talk a little bit more about two things? So one, is the proposal that private land trusts would purchase these easements, or would there be, is there an option for public purchase of the easements? And then second, I was a little bit unclear on whether you're suggesting that the precise type of easement that you're proposing would be perfectly permissible under the existing legal structure in Virginia, or whether there would need to be any kind of statutory amendment to move forward.
Yeah, so we are currently looking at private land trust organizations just because that is a little bit more accessible for us to be working with. Public organizations are a lot bigger and a lot less able to maneuver. And there are no statutory barriers. We are able to do any sort of partial easement currently right now.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that question just to understand the proposal at the end? You say it's Crep, cost share, and easements. But it sounds like the Crep program is already there, the cost share program is already there. So what is new is your proposal to expand the private purchase, as you just discussed, of riparian buffer zones. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
No, that is correct. Our policy proposal is to expand the purchase of the riparian buffer easements. The other examples were how they can work together with the existing programs to be feasible and able to be implemented.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So, and then on that, in one of the early slides that I think Gabriella showed, it suggested that of the scorecard, buffers were already the best. They got a B, everything else got a D. How does that mean there are already a lot of buffers? And if so, is that a good thing because people understand them, or how does that fit with the existing status or of buffers in the area?
Yes, of course. So in that report card I showed you, the buffers listed were forested buffers. This is a slightly different composition than what we are thinking of implementing. My understanding is that forested buffers will have and be composed of slightly different vegetation. And the idea is that a riparian buffer will be more accessible and be able to be planted and grown in a shorter period of time.
Additionally, the riparian buffers that we're looking at would be planted, grown along existing agricultural lands that either are already part of a cost share program and need some cost incentives to create the perpetual nature easements or benefits with the tax incentives, or they're agricultural lands that don't have it yet and we're putting it along their stream banks rather than targeting like forested buffers where there's not currently a farm on the land.
Okay, so when you say planted, are these being planted with agricultural crops that will then be annually harvested, or are they being planted with perennial crops that will be harvested but not dug up, or non-harvested crops?
Non-harvested crops. So there are some that have trees, there are other that are just ground cover, and there's agriculturalists and do have a background as to what the best crops for this filtration is. We just know that it works.
So, sorry, I know I asked you to take down your slides, but could you put back up for a second the slide where you had a slide towards the end with the estimates on the effectiveness of the. Okay. Wow. I wanted to see that again because I remembered those numbers as being really high and I just hadn't written them down. So I guess my question is this, because my initial reaction when you started talking about riparian buffers is that, while they're great, they don't actually do anything to reduce the amounts of nutrients that are entering the environment. They're just a mechanism to block those nutrients from making it into waterways. In other words, we don't have to change anything about the way we farm if we have these. And in fact, those numbers suggest that if we just have these 100-foot buffer strips on, and all, like, let's say we can get 100% coverage, right? They're on all agricultural lands. Does that mean we don't have to do anything else and we can just sort of continue the status quo of the way that we farm? Or do you view this as kind of a bridge, and then there would be a next step of actually addressing farming practices themselves?
I think if we were to put a 100-foot buffer on every farm in the entire of the Shenandoah Valley or the entire state of Virginia or the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, it probably would be significant enough. However, we don't have that explicit data. And the nature of the best management practices programs is you implement nutrient management plans to promote yields and to, like, I don't think we foresee this being the end-all solution, but we do foresee it being an extreme helpful solution. If a farmer implements these 100-foot stream buffer, they may not have to implement a nutrient management plan if it's not required, because it will filter. And if a farmer implements this, they'll probably still have to implement livestock exclusion, because to maintain a healthy buffer, you can't have bovine going in and out of your stream. So they do work with other programs, but this is a way that we can filter and clean the water that's going in without significantly impacting the way that agricultural runs in the area right now.
Just piggybacking off of that, and thank you for your presentation. Do you have a sense of how your proposal would dovetail or not with the House and Senate bill that you were talking about that requires the kind of BMPs and the other livestock practices on certain size farms?
So yeah, I actually think it would work really, really well with this idea. The livestock stream exclusion explicitly will require fencing. That fences off a riparian buffer anyways. Ideally, a landowner would have trees or vegetation planted there if they didn't already. But with this upcoming legislation, it's already going to have to be there. So we believe that it will make it easier to put your land under easement. People will be more motivated to, because all they're going to get out of that is extra money from land that they're already not allowed to use. So I think it will work really, really well hand in hand. And the nutrient management plans are going to be reducing the amount of nutrients that are being put on the croplands, and then also filtering them even more effectively.
Could you, thanks again for your presentation. I'll echo what other folks have said. Could you speak a little bit more about when you described the Virginia Crep program as being sort of widespread and effective? Does that mean widespread in terms of kind of participants or number of acres of land that are included in the program, or actual measurable changes to water quality? Do you have any kind of more specific information about that?
Off the top of my head, I don't have a ton of more specific information. I know that there are a lot of landowners that are participating in it and that they have seen a lot of improvements by it, but I don't have exact numbers of who's participating right now. But I can go look and find them for you if you would like.
So I have a more theoretical question for you, sort of less about how the proposal would work and more about how we justify it. So as I'm sure you know, I mean, agriculture is treated quite differently from by environmental law than most other polluting industries, right? In most other industries, we generally speaking follow a principle that polluters pay for the costs of reducing their own pollution. Now, of course, they are passing those costs on to consumers in lots of different kinds of ways, but in the first instance, they have to pay the bill. In the agricultural sector, we've not traditionally followed that principle, and your proposal suggests that in this instance, where there are already cost share options in place, we should add an additional mechanism through which farmers can be compensated for the costs of reducing a massive environmental problem that they have helped create. So can you just, that was not really in the form of a question. So the question is, can you kind of speak about how you think about that issue, and whether you think it might be appropriate actually to force farmers to internalize some of their own costs?
Hi. So by the EPA and the federal legislation enacted right now, the only thing that farmers are required to do, not required, but strongly suggested to use is best management practices, which are, again, completely voluntary, which is a barrier for legislation, especially in effectiveness. We believe because they are completely voluntary that we need to be incentivizing them to do these best management practices. And while they are contributing to the problem, the current legislation and the current regulatory structure, this is kind of the best way that we can figure out to kind of incentivize them to take these measures to kind of hold themselves accountable for making their part in pollution. And also, I know Samantha is going to help with this question as well.
So when I first started looking at these issues, I actually felt the same way. I didn't understand the cost burden. I didn't get why they couldn't just fence their cows out of the river and let it all be. And then I got a lot more involved with the agricultural community, and I learned that there are regulations as to how much they can sell their products for. And even though we're spending a lot of money on the meat or the products or the crops, they don't make that much money off of it. And so while we're looking in and saying, this company fixes their pollution issues, why can't this landowner? We also have to understand that commercial agriculture sucks for the environment. And if we're taking all of these landowners and saying, you have to pay for it, like I was talking about earlier, when we were talking about legislation and these barriers, the growing age of local agriculturalists in this area may make them feel like, am I going to spend $300,000 to implement all these best management practices that someone's telling me to? Or am I just going to pay out, let someone subdivide my land and retire? And then we continue to go into the commercial agricultural industry, which will cost more money in the end because it's even worse for the environment. And it just takes away from this community. And so that's where we felt like it was fair to say, here are these opportunities. You have to make it for yourself, but we need to incentivize and allow them to be able to afford the conservation policies.
Can I just follow up on that? I'm getting a little more confused now. When you say commercial, you're really comparing small scale farms to larger scale farms. Is that right?
Yeah. So taking the industry and making it into feedlots, and the way that it's already trending right now.
Okay. And are most of these operations that we're speaking of in this part are cow-calf operations? Presumably, they're cattle, not pigs or chicken, is that right? And they're ranging around. Do we know how they're grazed at all?
For the ones in the valley?
Yeah, in the Shenandoah
Yeah,
Valley.
so the valley has a big cattle industry and then a big poultry industry. which we're more focusing on the cattle industry since poultry houses are normally contained and operate a little bit differently. But yeah, they're mostly grass-fed operations, and they have like pasture land. There aren't feedlots in the area. So we're not looking at the feedlots, which I believe are covered as point source under the Clean Water Act because they are so large. And these are all non-point source, small farms ranging from 20 to 100 head of cattle in a herd.
Okay, and is there, in order to, how is would the value, if you know, of these riparian easements be calculated? Obviously, when you're thinking about farmland, it varies tremendously in value, both in terms of its potential subdivision value and its potential agricultural value, whether it's good soil, bad soil, well-drained or not. And you can sometimes make an argument that riparian buffers have the least value because it's the wettest land. It's often not very good for agriculture. Or in any event, what would be the process of valuation in order to buy these 100-foot buffer strips?
I am not 100% certain on what the estimated value would be just for the riparian buffer. That is something that the land trust organizations are a lot more learned in, and I can do some more research on it. As this isn't really a widespread thing, there's not a good way to take what Virginia already does and determine it. However, I do know that the income tax reductions that come with it, the land value reductions will be similar, just scaled down. And then the real big cost that comes with it is just the legal fees, which is normally around $1,500. And that's why we were looking at the grant funding. Because we don't expect these to be large in cost incentives, just a little bit to help out.
You're saying just to be clear, you're saying the cost of the actual riparian buffer, buying an easement on the riparian buffer, you wouldn't expect to be that large. So the farmer is not getting that much, and the land trust doesn't have to pay that much. Is that right? And one of the biggest costs would be the legal fees.
Yeah, so the biggest cost would be the legal fees. The farmer just gets a little incentive to help with upkeep and conservation. And so it's not really a large burden, just enough to help out and extremely help the nutrient management in the area.
Could you
So-
speak? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Um,
David.
I had a question about towards the end, you know, when you talked about what you would do with the prize money, and sorry, I don't know if you can hear a crying baby in the background, but anyway, it is mine, I confirm. And so you mentioned that you wanted to put it towards educational programs, which is very noble. And I just wanted to understand, because there are obviously a lot of NGOs and extension programs and crop advisors and a whole kind of ecosystem of educational programs that I imagine, I know exist in the Chesapeake Bay, and I imagine exist specifically in the Shenandoah Valley. And so I just wanted to understand a bit better how you see the added value of what you're proposing here in terms of what you would do with the award money.
So one of, I think, the biggest added values is working with the local Young Farmers chapter. We're not coming in from outside and telling people how they're supposed to be doing it or why they should be doing this. We're taking programs that address the explicit things that we know that farmers are concerned about, that we have gotten feedback with through the Valley Conservation Council. And then additionally, as I said, working with the local Young Farmers chapter. These are people that work in their schools. These are people that are their neighbors and their co-landowners. They're on the boards. And so we feel like if we work with these organizations that are already there and they already have an impact on the community, we're not telling someone that they have to do something, and we're not coming in from outside. We're working with them to understand and implement and assist with the technical nature of these programs.
Further, I feel
Okay.
like they would also be aware of the best way to convey these educational information so that the farmers and the members of the agricultural community can see the easement benefits, not as a burden.
And we felt that with the fact that the legal fees can amount up to $1,500, $2,000, it wouldn't make sense to find a single person, pay for their legal fees and implement it. But it would make sense to work together, create awareness of the program, work with landowners, and then also work with the land trust organization to get grant funding to cover the easement program.
Do you have any maybe specific ideas or examples kind of along the lines of the educational component and really trying to appeal to landowners for their participation? I know, you know, in the Northwest, the subject of buffers is pretty contentious with folks, and there's just been a lot of industry resistance. And so I imagine, you know, it might be a subject that people hear about and kind of want to turn and run the other direction. So, you know, financial incentives obviously seem like something to maybe focus on, but is there any other sort of interest that you think that the partner organizations you've identified could really appeal to that is maybe new or somehow different than some of the approaches that have been taken in the past?
Yeah, so we'd love to appeal to the benefits to farmers explicitly. Well, we're talking to you about why this is good for the water quality and nutrient management. There are so many reasons that it benefits farmers, including helping with biohazards. It keeps their land in better shape. It honestly makes it more fruitful because it's not muddy and destroyed all the time. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the Shenandoah Valley has a large Mennonite population, especially Mennonite farmers. So on top of a general hesitancy to work with the government, there's an even bigger hesitancy there. And so instead of bringing in just a government organization to talk about it, we're hoping that if we have a education program with a local organization, it will bring them in and have them actually listen to why this is beneficial instead of just having someone yell at them. Additionally, there's a big perceived risk of easements. That's something that the Valley Conservation Council did report back to us as a big barrier that they've had to deal with. And so we'd love to talk about why putting your property under an easement or a riparian buffer easement isn't as scary as it seems just by reading the papers that they hand out. And then additionally, with the rising age of agriculturalists and the fact that they spend most of their time in the field, there's a lot of technical issues and questions that come up while trying to apply for these. So we'd love to just have people there who know how to do it, who know how to answer questions, and they can help with the applications instead of people starting it and then feeling lost.
So
I just wanted to jump in for a moment and let the judges know you have 5 minutes left in this presentation. We can take additional questions, but just wanted to give everyone the warning.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned, I think, that Pennsylvania already has a program like somewhat like this. I think in New York, there's a Trees for Tribs program. Are there any specific learnings that you have taken from other regional programs that are similar? Like, did you look at Pennsylvania, New York, or others? And if so, what specifically did you pull from them?
One thing that I noticed with the Pennsylvania agreement, we did ours as a 100-foot buffer because that's what the cost share and Crep programs in Virginia do encourage. But the Pennsylvania agreement actually uses a smaller buffer, and I'm interested to see if that would be more ideal for a landowner in Virginia. I think we did learn that from looking through that. A couple other things, it's a pretty it's not that widespread of a program as I would have expected it to be. So I'm not sure if they don't do as much promotion of the program or if it's not as like sought after, and that's not something that I can tell you off the top of my head, but I can look into finding more information as to the program and how it works in these other states.
I have a quick technical question about the legality of, so if I understood correctly, your suggestion is that a farmer could participate in the Crep program and also sell an easement to a land trust. So I'm a little bit, I guess I just wonder, like, once I sell an easement to a land trust, would the terms of the easement not then constrain me from also kind of renting the land through the Crep program, or would it be the easement holder rather than the farmer who would then participate in the Crep program?
So one of the things about Virginia easements is you're not completely relinquishing ownership of your land. You still own it. You can still sell it to somebody else. And so these programs don't restrict you from taking advantage of other programs.
Right. I guess I just wonder, would it be the farmer or the easement holder who would then be able to participate in Crep?
I'm not sure yet, because this isn't something that we've tried to go through the steps of doing so. I know that other conservation easement properties and Crep programs are working together, but I don't have an explicit answer for you.
Katie, should we?
Hey, I'd like to thank everyone from the University of Maryland. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I'd like to welcome our judges for all of your probing questions. Also welcome now to the floor the team members from the University of Baltimore School of Law. If you'd like to turn your cameras on. The University Baltimore School of Law team consists of Brian Lee Kress, Ernesta Villaseñor Jr., Alexander Kowecki, Nicholas Nelson, Vidi Kuman, Catherine Jeffries, James Duffy, Bentley Green Sr., and Bentley Green Jr., and the team is coached by Sonia Ziaha. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you to begin your presentation. You have 30 minutes for your presentation, followed by 15 minutes for the judges to question.
Good afternoon. My name is Vidi Kumar, and I will be starting off our presentation, Analysis of Poultry Operations in Maryland, a proposal to expand Maryland's litter transfer program. May I have the next slide, please? The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the United States and the third largest in the world, with over 11,000 miles of shoreline along its coast and tributaries. Spanning across 6 states, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, the estuary receives water from a region of over 64,000 square miles. However, the bay's economic value and the livelihood of its millions of residents depend on the stability and conservation of its unique and vast ecosystem. Such biodiversity provides the economic productivity of the bay, as over 500 million pounds of seafood are harvested from the bay, and jobs between Maryland and Virginia rely on the bay's biodiversity. May I have the next slide, please? Agricultural practices, particularly poultry farming, have grown across the watershed region and contribute massive amounts of nutrient pollution to the ecosystem. Nutrient pollution, specifically from nitrogen and phosphorus, poses a unique challenge for the bay. This pollution threatens the bay's biodiversity, while human industrial processes from across this region threaten the biodiversity and stability of the bay's ecosystems. May I have the next slide, please? So starting off with a little bit of history, Purdue's Farms founder Arthur Purdue invented the mass industrialized approach in the Chesapeake Bay during the 1920s, with the majority of the operations starting and remaining present in the Maryland's eastern shore. Over time, proper management, continued streamlining of operations, and other factors that help control disease and maintain efficiency have also given rise to the very conditions that allowed poultry farms to become the behemoths that they are today. These modern poultry farm operations have placed the Eastern Shore as one of the leading centers of poultry production, with 2020 seeing upwards of 200 million chickens being produced in Maryland. However, one of the larger issues present is the poultry industry today, as it is the amount of litter that is produced and its implications for the health of humans and in the environment. May I have the next slide, please? So to refresh our memory on a little bit of terminology, concentrated and animal feeding operations are termed CAFOs. These CAFOs are regulated by the EPA under the Clean Water Act. However, every CAFO in Maryland must obtain a permit to discharge pollutants. Animal feeding operations, termed AFOs, are defined by the Maryland Department of Agriculture. It is a feedlot or facility where animals are confined and fed for a total of 45 calendar days or more in a 12-month period. Further, medium to large AFOs are CAFOs. If pollutants are discharged to surface water, a permit is required for a CAFO in Maryland. I will now hand it off to my colleague Ernesto, who will discuss our existing statutory framework in the Maryland Transport Program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Ernesto Villaseñor, and I'll be continuing on the presentation. So AFO and CAFO regulations first came under light under the Clean Water Act of 1972, which shed light on the resulting pollutants from AFOs and CAFOs. As we know, over time, the Clean Water Act has undergone many adaptations and amendments, and it's evolved to include broad regulations and a permit system overseeing how chicken litter disposal is handled under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. These NPDES permits require poultry operations to implement a nutrient management plan, which monitors chicken litter produced from the poultry operations themselves. The site-specific nutrient management plan is also aimed to ensure adequate storage of chicken litter and the wastewater resulting from the poultry operations, and also to incorporate site-specific protocols for land application of chicken litter. Maryland's statutory framework creates also a general discharge permit for poultry operations in the state. This general discharge permit addresses a gap identified in the definition of CAFOs under the Clean Water Act. Poultry operations that do not discharge to surface water are exempted from the requirement of securing an NPDES permit. The general discharge permit addresses that gap for poultry operations and addresses a discharge affecting both groundwater and or when pollution contacts surface water. Maryland's Nutrient Management Program and the Nutrient Management Plan under the Water Quality Improvement Act were derived as best management practices aimed at reducing nutrient pollution impacting the Chesapeake Bay, and has been considered one of the most effective means of controlling excessive nutrient applications. Also, too, a little bit of history on the Maryland Water Quality Improvement Act of 1998, which came as a result of large fish kill-offs in the Chesapeake Bay because of AFO and CAFO operations. It established the Manure Transport Program as a pilot program, which continues to this day, and I'll further discuss. Next slide, please. The following are opportunities for development we've identified, which could potentially expand on the impact of current policies and programs in place. So we've identified as the following proposals: expanding incentives for the Manure Transport Program, increasing the funding for the Manure Transport Program itself, the further development of stockpiling and storage of chicken litter, increasing setback requirements for poultry operations, and also targeted education campaigns in the Eastern Shore. Although these proposals are not necessarily new, they do not negate their effectiveness once implemented. We've devised the aforementioned proposals given the ability to work with current policy infrastructure already in place, shifting away from reinventing the wheel to expanding that which has had some success in addressing nutrient pollution. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, one of the proposals that we aim to introduce is increasing incentives for the Manure Transport Program. The current Manure Transport Program and the way the Manure Transport Program functions, its role is to facilitate the transport of manure from overproducers of chicken litter to nutrient-poor farms requiring manure, and also transporting that excess chicken litter to land capable of holding additional phosphorus from the chicken litter itself. As I mentioned earlier, the Manure Transport Program started as a pilot program in 1998 with an established price of paying either farmers or brokers $20 per ton as it related to the transportation of chicken litter, which covers around 40 to 50% of the total cost associated with the transportation of chicken litter. Earlier this year, that price increased to $28 per ton. So as I mentioned, one of our right now, the Manure Transfer Program could only be accessed either by the broker or the farmer who can apply for the transportation cost reimbursement. One of our proposals is to expand it to both farmers and brokers to access this reimbursement incentive. And the impact that we've identified is that it incentivizes farmers who may not have access to the transfer brokers to transfer out their excessive chicken litter, providing provisions for transporting to nutrient-poor lands. And of course, in expanding this manure transfer program for both brokers and farmers, there's the conversation about the money. How is it going to cover the money? How do we address the money? Next slide, please. So that, and addressing that and increasing the manure transfer program, we want to increase the state funding from $1 million to $2 million a year. Currently, the $1 million a year being spent on the manure transfer program facilitates around 20% of Maryland's chicken litter. And the reason why we want to go from $1 million to $2 million, it really comes down to just adjusting for inflation. Between 1998 and 2021, 23 years, it's only gone up about $8, and it doesn't address the changes in inflation. So currently is at $28 per ton, and our proposal is to increase it to around $48 per ton, just to adjust for inflation. And in that following year, after we increase that funding from $1 million to $2 million a year, we want to assess the data if that facilitated, if that chicken litter growth in the manure transfer program, did it grow linearly with increased budget? And also to further investigate if it's worthwhile to continue increasing the transfer budget. We don't want to just say we're increasing it to $2 million and that's it. We want to see if there's actually an increase in the usage of the manure transfer program. And I will hand it off to my colleague who will continue on in the other proposals.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Brian Krell, and I will be continuing our policy presentation. First, for our proposal on the stockpiling of chicken manure. Currently, Maryland CAFOs may store dry chicken litter uncovered on their field and without separating it from stormwater for up to 30 days. We propose increasing this allowable day length for Maryland CAFOs to stockpile chicken litter. The stockpiling day limit on chicken litter should be increased because a too short of a limit may unnecessarily negatively pressure producers to inappropriately dispose of their litter and hopefully allow more producers to participate in our proposed expanded manure transport program. The available data on the leaching of litter was reviewed by the Chesapeake Research Consortium, and this group had suggested that the majority of the risk of leaching to the soil occurs within the first 4 days of the pile's construction. They suggested that there's little difference in terms of nutrient loss to the soil between litter stockpiled for 14 days and litter that's stockpiled for up to 190 days. Maryland could consider setting the limit as high as 190 days based on this documented research trial. However, we suggest the setting of the allowable day length to be in accordance with the available data and also in conjunction with our expanded manure transport program. Therefore, the 30-day limit on Maryland CAFOs should be reconsidered, and we believe the allowable day length should be increased because it would provide producers more time to properly dispose of their excess litter. Having too short of a window may put negative pressures on the farmers, and they may need to prematurely apply to fields or other means of inappropriate disposal in order to meet this short maximum allowance. Additionally, increasing the length could allow some producers to participate in the manure transport program where otherwise litter producers may not have been available to. An example of that would be if the limit is 30 days, but the manure transport program can only pick up every 60 days, they can only participate every other litter collection. Next slide, please. Our next proposal pertains to the setback requirements and an exemption to those requirements. A setback requirement is a property limitation that prohibits the application of fertilizer to fields within a set distance from the surface water or property boundary and the fields of which the fertilizer could be applied to. Currently, Maryland's general permit requirement for Maryland CAFO requires a 100-foot setback between the property boundary or surface water and the field. However, there is a notable exception to this setback requirement. Maryland CAFOs that have a 2% slope or less qualify for the setback requirement exemption. This exemption instead calls for a 50-foot setback and a 10-foot vegetative buffer within that 50-foot setback. Our proposal is to eliminate this Maryland CAFO exemption and require all Maryland CAFOs to have the ordinary CAFO setback standard of 100 feet from any boundary or surface water. We recommend only applying this 100-foot setback to newly licensed Maryland CAFOs instead of applying it to already existing licensed Maryland CAFOs in order to more easily pass this regulatory change and also to not overly burden the current CAFO producers. Though the vegetative buffer aspect of the exemption is a good idea, data regarding the degree of effectiveness, specifically in the Eastern Shore, is not readily available. We believe that site-specific research is important because of the Eastern Shore's unique soil composition, which is extremely sandy. Therefore, any extrapolation of data from any other jurisdiction like Pennsylvania or Virginia on the effectiveness of a vegetative buffer may not be appropriate. Additionally, we believe there should be more research in irregularly shaped buffers. An irregularly shaped buffer could provide a greater water quality benefit than just a uniform rectangularly shaped buffer. This irregularly shaped buffer could follow along slope line or a unique property line. Because there seems to be a lack of data regarding the effectiveness of vegetative buffers, specifically on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, we believe this setback exemption of 2% slope or less CAFOs should be eliminated, and we recommend holding all CAFOs in Maryland to the same setback standard. I will now introduce my colleague Alex, who will talk about our education proposal.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Alex. Kowicki, and I'll be presenting our final policy proposal. Excuse me one second. Our final policy proposal is an education campaign. Such a program would allow policymakers and environmental advocates to learn from farmers about their current perspectives and educate farmers about their current impact on the environment. We would assemble this program first by polling and surveying farmers and determine what they know and do not know about CAFOs, MAFOs, and their environmental impacts. We'd use this information to develop a centralized program platform to present information and identify buyers and sellers. This would inform future policy proposals and, like I said, educate farmers about the effects of eutrophication. This platform would serve as a connection for brokers, transporters, and producers of poultry waste, and it would link farmers to their relevant politicians, and it would also be a forum to include relevant reports and studies. Currently, a website exists for farmers to trade litter with each other, but this website does not attempt to educate farmers to help create an efficient and environmentally sustainable litter market. We hope that our proposed platform will meet this need, and the main goal of our program is ultimately to foster relationships in and outside the Chesapeake agricultural community. Ernesto will now explain what's to come.
So what do we plan to do with the prize money should we win? As we further discussed, all of our proposals are really part of just one giant umbrella proposal that we want to pitch in. So we want to use that prize money to further investigate and see the understanding of the initial application of those proposals. The first start would be with an education campaign. Really engage and understand what the farmers and the poultry operators know and do not know about the manure transfer program, how they could access it, how they could apply to get those reimbursements, and then even also to just understand to see if they know like where to transfer their excess poultry chicken litter, and also we want to use that funding to start a pilot study, work with a poultry operator themselves to apply some of these proposals and gather the evidence for effectiveness. And then ultimately, like in that education gathering campaign, whether it's surveying the poultry operators, we want to take that information to decision makers and other stakeholders to let them know, like, hey, like before we start talking to them about these proposals and start requesting funding, we already show up with some of the data and some of the information to back up some of these proposals themselves. But in addition to, and also to in that education and investigation campaign, there are some of the other like questions that we still want to consider and we still want to look at in that education campaign. For example, funding for the increase in the manure transfer program. Do we want to create public and private partnerships with the poultry operators themselves to kind of create this additional funding? Do we want to, some of the funding right now comes from the general sales tax. Does that mean increasing that sales tax to the consumer themselves so that they could pay for this manure transfer program? And also too, we want to expand the climate, like further understand the impact of climate, of best practices in other areas where chicken litter is a concern to climate change. And ultimately, we also want to create an eco map of the resources and the tools that are already available, identify other gaps for the dissemination of these tools and resources to the poultry operators themselves, and identify other opportunities for community engagement. Ultimately, we don't want to come to these poultry operators as this is what you need to do. We want to come to them to really ask them, what can we do to make your poultry operations more efficient, more sustainable, and reduce that impact that they have to the Chesapeake Bay with the nutrient pollution runoff and ultimately climate change. That's pretty much our presentation. Thank you so very much. And we're more than happy to take your questions.
Thanks, I'll jump in. Great presentations, thank you very much. A couple questions for several of you. The question on the extending the time for uncovered stockpiling. That seems a bit, I admit, counterintuitive, having the waste there to leach into the ground for a lot longer or to run off. And you argue that by doing that, they have more time to perhaps use the litter transport program. Why that as opposed to, if you're expanding the litter transport program, have them pick up more often or something like that to try to address that, or get them to cover it? It seems a strange response. And then I think that was for Brian. And then for similarly, you have a proposal to eliminate the setback exemption, but then would apply it only to new poultry operations. And that map you had, which was very good, showed that there's already quite a few poultry operations there. How big a gap would that create if none of the existing ones were subject to that? It would seem to be a pretty significant.
I had that same question, so just a quick addendum to it. I was just curious how many new poultry operations are coming online regularly every year in Maryland?
So I guess in regard to the first question that you mentioned, it does seem counterintuitive to set that limit greater than what it is right now. However, data from research that we have found suggests that the majority of that leaching occurs within the first 4 days. So if you don't remove it within the first 4 days, nearly all of the leachable water-soluble excretions are already seeped into the soil. So setting that limit at, say, 14 days might seem a little bit arbitrary and unnecessarily burdensome to those producers that have it on the field in that time. We also, as you had stated, recommend increasing that day length in order to have producers be able to participate in the program more readily. And we suggest setting that day limit in coordination with our proposed expanded manure transport program. If the manure transport program can't pick up any sooner than every 30 days, because a lot of these locations are very distant and very far apart from where the manure goes, we recommend setting that date in coordination with what the manure transport program is able to do. So unless that manure is removed from the field, the litter is removed from the field within the first 4 days, you've kind of already lost all the water soluble nutrients from it.
Just a general scientific comment. I mean, and this actually applies to the previous presentation too. Just one of the things that makes especially nitrogen so unique is that it can translate into different forms pretty easily. The phenomenon is known as the nitrogen cascade, and it's actually in situations like this, it's been shown in certain situations, like in Denmark and the Netherlands, when they were forced to keep all their manure in these kind of stockpiles and not apply them on fields because of regulations around leaching and runoff, that actually it led to a bump in ammonia emissions. So you were leading to pollution swapping, where you might be reducing one form of pollution, nutrient pollution, and actually exacerbating another one. And it's been shown potentially to be the case in certain types of riparian buffers as well, where you reduce the amount of nitrate going into waterways, but you might create actually really good conditions for nitrous oxide N2O emissions. So just to be aware of that just the science of it. My question was linked to the kind of the litter, manure, and the transport. I was a bit confused as to the difference between, I understood the kind of pricing difference of your proposal, increasing the price per ton. You mentioned this idea of that currently the farmer or the broker can enroll in the program, versus now you're proposing the farmer and the broker. And I was a bit confused as to the difference between that and what your proposal, how that might change the dynamic of the current policy.
So that proposal really is to just to kind of address any gaps where there might be farms that actually are producing excess chicken litter, but may not have access, or there may not be an actual transport broker within their vicinity. So just to make it more accessible and more easy for the farmers to actually be able to use the manure transport program. So that's kind of like one of the reasons behind the policy proposal, just to make it available to either one or the other. And then even also too, you have a lot of the manure brokers who are definitely generating a lot of income from transporting the chicken litter, but a lot of that funding doesn't go back to the poultry operations and the farmers themselves. So we also want to address that, so that it's not just a one versus the other, but both the broker and the farmer, the poultry operator themselves, are able to access these fundings. Just because, as we know, with the production of chicken litter, in storing it, it's not necessarily a cheap thing to store all this excess poultry litter. And with the transport costs themselves, there's also the loading and unloading of the chicken litter from the poultry operations themselves. So we want to get as much of that funding in all the steps connecting to the manure transfer program.
And do you have a sense? Sorry, just one quick follow up to that. Do you have a sense? You mentioned that the litter would be transported to farms with more nutrient poor. Do you have a sense of what the criteria is for what a nutrient poor farm is? Because I mean, most farmland in the United States is relatively nutrient rich, if not, at least, using quite a bit. So just if there are, I guess my concern would be that if you're suddenly transporting a lot of manure, which I think ultimately is a good idea, if it can replace synthetic fertilizer and you create a more circular system and a closed system, but you may also be displacing the pollution problem from the place that produces the chicken litter to another area. And I'm just wondering if there's been, if there's any data around that, or how farms are identified, and whether there are any rules about how it can be applied once it's taken to a new farm.
So the current rules that are present in the state of Maryland is that the chicken litter that's being transported has to be done in within a minimum 7 mile radius. So it cannot be anywhere within 7 miles, just to address that nutrient rich, where it's already there's already nutrient rich areas, to make sure that it goes to nutrient poor areas. One of the conversations, and even amongst ourselves as team members, we were debating, all right, we address the nutrient rich to the nutrient poor, but what does that mean with the transportation? In terms of, we know transportation could also contribute to other sources of pollution that we may not have taken into consideration. And right now with the manure transfer program, we really want to strengthen the infrastructure already in place. We already know that the manure transfer program is addressing around 20% of the excess chicken litter being produced. So you want to get as much of that excess chicken litter being produced to kind of move it to nutrient poor areas.
Thank you.
just to follow up on that, so I understand, is the assumption that the nutrient poor areas are off the eastern shore? Or are these expected to be also on the eastern shore? Looking at that map, it seems like the whole eastern shore is going to be well over nutrient, have plenty of nutrients. So the transport is far much further away?
Yes, that is correct. And with
Does it even
that
have to
manure,
be- Sorry, does it even have to be in Maryland, the nutrient poor area? Or
no, it does not. So one of some of the programs that we've already seen with the manure transfer program is some of that manure chicken litter being taken to Pennsylvania to mushroom farms, where they are actually using a lot of the chicken litter. And chicken litter is really good for the growth of mushrooms. So it doesn't necessarily have to stay within the state of Maryland. It could be moved out of the state to another neighboring state. But also to, like, in order to address and keep that closed loop system, even if that excess chicken litter was capped within the Chesapeake Bay, is going to a nutrient poor part of the Chesapeake Bay that is in need of that phosphorus or nitrogen from that chicken litter.
how well policed is that? I mean, how much enforcement is there about once the stuff is loaded into a truck about where it's actually going and who's measuring what counts as a nutrient poor area?
So the Maryland Department of Agriculture has identified that around 20% of that chicken litter is going through the manure transfer program throughout the state of Maryland. We don't we didn't find any data to demonstrate exactly which other farmers or which other brokers are using the manure transfer program. And we didn't really come upon a lot of enforcement data itself in terms of, are they following the manure transfer program? Is there are specific protocols in terms of loading and unloading, the kind of I guess containers that hold the chicken litter itself, so that there's no runoff or none of it is leaching during the transportation process. But there's no kind of, this is what we found, or this is how much of the chicken litter during the transport process is still kind of leaching off and hitting the roads.
I guess I'm just imagining one of those brokers taking the subsidy on the front end and then, just dumping it in the bay in the middle of the night. Anyway, I have a sort of separate question about this program. I'm all for a closed loop system, but I'm a little hesitant about a system that creates an active constituency that's now going to be dependent on the continued production of large volumes of chicken manure. So in other words, imagining some, maybe naive potential possible future in which we don't produce, we don't have animal agriculture in this way. Expanding a program like this is just creating another constituency of people who wants us to continue farming animals in this way because they're now dependent on the chicken manure.
Well, I mean, it's a great question, but we also have to look at the larger implications of fertilizer usage and fertilizer production. Fertilizer production is not necessarily the cleanest way. We do know that artificial fertilizer production has a large impact on climate change. So in retaining these operations, of course, we do know that there are other impacts and other sources of pollution that come out of these large poultry operations, but we do address that artificial fertilizer production. We have cheap chicken litter that's accessible by large and small farmers, and it's green. I mean, there's nothing artificial about it. You could take it to your mushroom farm in Pennsylvania, and that's pretty much it. You don't have to worry about the larger implications from the artificial fertilizer production.
If I can, perhaps a broader question. In a sense, it is, why are you being so solicitous to these poultry farmers? They're producing a vast amount of pollution. And Maryland has you explained, a somewhat effective permitting program. And why not, rather than doing so much to encourage them to have this poultry litter not pollute, why not mandate either some of this?
I mean, the quick and simple question would be politics. We do understand that poultry operations and the large farmers are very influential in Maryland politics and regional politics altogether. So we don't want to come about like stepping on their toes and infuriating them or kind of like infringing on their poultry operations themselves, where it no longer even becomes addressing the manure or the chicken litter, but now it's much more easier for them to push against any possible legislation or policy proposals that we may have to address it in the long run. So we're really kind of working with the poultry operations and the farmers themselves so that we could work together and both identify and understand the implications of the poultry operations, but really kind of encourage them to be part of that solution. We don't want to be part of that alienation or alienating process where it just hyper polarizes things and then there's no conversation or no dialogue on addressing this greater issue.
And is that why you exempted the existing CAFOs from the elimination of the setback exemption, which, as I mentioned earlier, seems to be a pretty big loophole and wouldn't have much of an impact if it doesn't apply to existing CAFOs?
So we recommended, we recommended exempting already existing Maryland CAFOs from this regulation for two reasons. One, to more easily pass this regulatory change. We believe that we'd face much more pushback if we had to retroactively apply these to all already existing Maryland CAFOs, and also just to generally not overly burden the current producers. And also to your point of why are we going out of our way to benefit these producers? Personally, in my own opinion, society is very dependent on industrial agriculture as it exists currently. Even though none of us are proponents for CAFOs, we're not here advocating for the existence of CAFOs, but it would be very difficult to produce the extent of meat production that society demands currently and at the price that society is okay with paying through alternate routes. We're kind of dependent on industrial agriculture of CAFOs. And if I may, Ms. Pollins, address a question that you had a few questions ago. What happens when the litter gets stored into the trucks and gets transported? Does it go into a black box of unregulation? No, the manure that's actually transported through the manure transport program maintains tracking from source to where it's being applied. The manure does not go off the grid in the sense of not being regulated. And it has to meet the nutrient management plans and best management practices of the farm of which it's being delivered to. So it's not kind of just out in space.
I had a question about the education campaign that you talked about. And I was wondering if, as you were kind of crafting it, I mean, there's a lot of research out there, particularly in kind of rural sociology and people that actually work directly with farmers, thinking about, who do farmers trust, right? Who do they listen to? Where do they get their information from? Who are they influenced by? And so I was wondering if that kind of, perhaps not that literature, but at least that approach to an education campaign of not just setting up a new website or a new thing, but actually focused on understanding how farmers make decisions and how they get their information, if that was built in to this education campaign, and if so how?
Yeah, so with our proposal with that initial funding, we want to go straight to a poultry operation. We want to go to a farmer, work with them, and then not only try to create a pilot study or a pilot program from the proposal initials that we have with them, but then also too, once we have those findings, use that farmer that we work with to also be a part of our education campaign. So as that farmer, as that poultry operation is working with other farmers, it's not kind of us versus them, or this person, this organization or entity came and talked down to us, but you're having the farmer and the community itself leading that education campaign, where they're really more as facilitating the process, but it's really poultry operator farmer led.
So I question, you explained that you would use the prize money if you were to get it for education and perhaps starting a pilot project. Have you costed any of this out to have any sense of what you could do? How much of an education project could you do for the prize money, or when you say a pilot project, have you any sense of the scale that you could do with the prize money? Or would the prize money be hopefully just a way to then inspire somebody else to give you more to be able to do these programs?
So it's a combination of both. We do know that education campaigns are not necessarily the cheapest. We do know one of the tools that we want to use within the education campaign is creating surveys. Asking questions, doing outreach to the farmers themselves. That's probably the most cost efficient and cost effective proposal. But in getting those initial findings, presenting it to larger regional alliances, to other organizations that are funding, and then even taking it also to the Maryland Department of Agriculture and the University of Maryland's extension program, which does a lot of outreach and working with the farmers themselves in the state of Maryland. So it's really more of a start of seed funding and then taking it to like the next level. So it's really not kind of we like just really using it as kind of like the catalyst for something bigger that could happen.
And just to follow up for that, I think this was for Alex. You wanted, or also about this education campaign. Why do you think farmers would answer this poll that you wanted to ask, or the survey? The best of surveys have very low response rates. How would you get enough farmers to respond that you get useful data and have a sense that it's actually representative?
It's a great question. I'm sorry, what's up?
No.
That's a great question. I am aware that most surveys have a significantly low return rate. Besides asking as many farmers as we can, I'm not sure how we would break that pattern. That's the best I can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to jump in and let everyone know we just have 5 minutes until the end of the questions. I'll offer to the judges if people have questions. That's great. Any more questions from the judging panel? And if not, I'm happy to offer everyone a 5-minute, as one of my clients used to call them, bio break. And we can reconvene at 2:40 to start to hear from our team from the University of Miami. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all so much, University of Baltimore, for your presentation. And we will see everyone start our next presentation in about 5 minutes at 2:40. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd love to invite the team members from the University of Miami School of Law to turn on your cameras. The University of Miami is represented by Samantha Crystal, Jordan Mound, and Natibo Mokoena. Welcome, we're excited to have you here. And I just want to confirm that all of our judges are back and present before you kick off your presentation.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. I think I see everyone. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Oh, and I should mention, the University of Miami team is coached by Jessica Owley. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. We are the University of Miami School of Law team, and we are excited to be here today to discuss nutrient pollution in the Biscayne Bay. Before we get started, we would like to take a moment for some acknowledgements and introductions.
We acknowledge that this brief was drafted on and discusses pollution on stolen Seminole and Miccosukee lands. Any discussion of pollution, land use, and mitigation should include the original people of the land we currently occupy. We thank tribal communities for contributing knowledge to this brief. We also thank the individuals listed here for taking the time to discuss nutrient pollution with us. We were able to consult faculty, scientists, community leaders, attorneys, tribal leaders, and elected officials in Miami-Dade County. My name is Ntebohang Mokoena, and I am a first-year law student at the University of Miami. I have a degree in political science from American University. For the past few years, I worked as a campaign manager in DC, advocating for bold climate and racial justice policy on a national level. Additionally, I organized with a local climate justice group, 350 DC.
Hello, my name is Samantha Crystal, and I am also a first-year student here at the University of Miami School of Law. I have an undergraduate degree in civil engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and I've spent the past several years working in construction management in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Mon. I'm a second-year law student and first-year master's student at the University of Miami. I have a marine science background, and I grew up in the Florida Keys, which lie just south of Miami. So the area we will discuss today is very close to my heart and my hometown. Today, we will be sharing a policy proposal which offers interventions to mitigate nutrient pollution from nitrogen and phosphorus in the Biscayne Bay. The Biscayne Bay is a lagoon off the Atlantic coast of South Florida that lies just north of the Florida Keys and is centered within the vast urban area of Miami. The bay consists of shallow water separated from the ocean by sandbars and coral reefs, and it hosts both seagrass and hard-bottom surfaces. The bay spans about 150,000 acres and is divided into 3 regions. The northern region is the smallest but contains urbanized areas with high nutrient outputs. The central region is the largest and consists of canals varying in salinity due to nutrient runoff coming from the Monarch Hill Renewable Energy Park, a large landfill north of Miami. The southern region is less developed, but still receives nitrogen and phosphorus pollution because it contains Turkey Point, a nuclear generating station east of Homestead, and the human-made C-111 canal, which sucks water and sends it east, the opposite direction of the natural flow. The Biscayne Bay provides numerous valuable ecosystem services to both humans and the environment. This photo shows a part of the Biscayne Bay which hosts seagrass and mangrove species. These marine plants are extremely important because they act as a nursery for many juvenile aquatic species, a means of blue carbon storage, a water purification system, and a sediment stabilizer which protects the coast. In addition to all of these valuable services, the bay also acts as a unique source for research, a great site for fishing opportunities, both commercial and recreational, and a great tourism attraction, which makes it even more vital because a majority of South Florida's economy is based on tourism. The keystone species living in the bay and providing all of these important services are highly susceptible to discharges of nutrients and other pollutants from land-based sources. The water in the bay comes from a combination of canal systems and ocean currents moving southward along the coast. With the exponential increase of Miami's residential and tourist populations, the demand for homes and other necessities has driven a sharp increase in construction, including the digging of man-made canals. As you can see on this slide, the man-made canals have altered the flow of water within the coastal ecosystems and significantly altered freshwater flow into the bay. This means that nutrients applied to agricultural lands are now reaching the east and west coasts faster than they would have with the natural flow. This is concerning because most marine organisms are harmed by elevated nutrient levels, which has been evidenced by decreasing populations, large-scale fish kills, and more. The three main local sources of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution near the Biscayne Bay are agricultural fertilizer, wastewater, and stormwater runoff. Runoff from fertilizers containing nitrogen and phosphorus applied to agricultural areas near Homestead and to the south of the Lake Okeechobee, which is seen on the map, reaches the bay through a series of man-made canals, resulting in irreversible harm to local marine life. Nitrogen and phosphorus from wastewater reach the bay through wastewater treatment plant marine outfall discharges, leaking and overflowing sewer lines, and the leaching of septic tank systems. Stormwater runoff also carries large traces of nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizer, pet excrement, and leaf litter into the bay as it flows over suburban neighborhoods, urban areas, golf courses, and construction sites, then through storm drains and empty into the bay. Together, these pollution sources are bringing excess nutrients into the bay, causing harm to almost all of the species living within it.
So, as Jordan described, this is a large issue from a wide variety of sources, and there is no silver bullet solution for nutrient pollution. Our team talked to a wide variety of experts from the civil engineering field, wastewater engineering, and construction management, in addition to local policy advocate groups and government officials. And from these conversations, we determined that there are two main angles of attack for dealing with this really large and widespread issue. The first angle is reduction, so strategies to reduce the amount of nutrients that are entering the system. And the two main ways that we see going about this are, number one, fertilizer reduction. So there are current bans in place that could be expanded, extending the marine protected areas. So currently this fertilizer ban protects certain, like I think 20 feet within any waterway, and then also either incentivizing or requiring the usage of native plants. The other option would be wastewater and sewage system updates. So this would look like updating the equipment at treatment plants. As Jordan mentioned, there are three that directly dump into the bay, fixing leaking sewer lines, and also decommissioning septic tank systems. Now, the treatment plant and sewer line action items are currently being undertaken by the county. They are funded and they have large projects that are underway. Decommissioning of the septic tank systems here is a huge issue because it's going to be very expensive and timely to get all of these houses online onto the existing wastewater system. Additionally, about a third of the households in the state of Florida are on septic tank systems. So this is a very widespread Floridian problem, and the state funding for it has already been depleted. The second angle of attack here that we looked at was management. So this is looking at strategies to manage the nutrients that are already in the water system. This looks a lot like green and gray infrastructure solutions. So things like rain gardens and bioswales, permeable pavement systems, and next generation seawalls. Now, when we are looking at these types of solutions, what we are trying to do is drive the water down into the ground instead of just going straight into the stormwater sewer system and into the bay. So by directing this water downward, we would prefer infrastructure solutions that look like rain gardens and bioswales because, as other teams have discussed today, they include plants, and these plants help with nutrient uptake. However, permeable pavement systems, although they don't do nutrient uptake, are still going to be an important part of this equation. If we can have infrastructure solutions that layer all of these types of solutions and others, we can create essentially a buffer before the water would just go straight into the stormwater sewage system and direct these nutrients downward into the ground. Now, it's also important to mention the enforcement of stormwater pollution prevention plans. Skip the slide, here we go. So this is a type of license that falls under that National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System that was created by the Clean Water Act. There's a lot of development going on in Miami right now, as you can see in this picture. The city is really attempting to take advantage of the relaxed COVID restrictions in the area and drive economic development. They are building a lot of new residential housing and a lot of new commercial projects. There's also a lot of tech moving into the area, so construction projects are everywhere. So the legal obstacles here in the path of enforcement of SWIP really come down to the fact that large developers in this tourism industry are holding sway over the political landscape. It's really important that SWIP is enforced because these plans would keep the water from just running over these construction sites and, as stated before, going straight into the bay. Now, when we are looking at the implementation of all of these solutions, it's going to be significantly impacted by the legal structure in the Biscayne Bay area. As you can see on this slide, we have a map of the county of Miami-Dade, and there are 34 different municipalities. For the purposes of this project, we chose to focus on the city of Miami, which is the big red one that touches a significant portion of the bay. So when we're looking at regulation, we have this 4-tier structure. You have federal regulations with regulatory agencies and also legislation, state, and then the county and the city breakdown. And although you have regulation coming from the Clean Water Act and the Florida Clean Waterways Act, when it comes to actual enforcement of these regulations, it's really falling on the city and the county. The city and the county does also enact ordinances and bans in addition to regulating these federal and state requirements. But when we are looking at the breakdown between the county and the city, you can see that there's a lot of overlap. Both the county and the city do fertilizer regulation. They both touch numerous roadways and highways in the area. And while the sanitary sewer system is regulated by the county, the storm sewer system is managed by the city. Additionally, building codes and the City Department of Resilience and Public Works manage the building and construction in the area. So it's really imperative that both the county and the city are working together for any successful solution to manage nutrient pollution.
We recommend 3 viable pathways for local government to achieve nutrient reduction. First is to enforce the fertilizer ban for commercial applicators. Second is to decommission septic systems. And third is to provide community education. A large portion of Florida's economy is driven by the Gulf and tourism industries. Together with a need for additional inspectors, the tourism industry's impact on the local economy presents a huge barrier in enforcement of the current fertilizer bans. Per discussions with the Chief Bay Officer, we learned that not only were these industries able to carve out exceptions in the current ban, skirting accountability for fertilizer use, but that the county could really use more inspectors. Thus, we recommend the county hire 2 additional inspectors for equitable soil and water quality testing and inspections focused on wealthier neighborhoods and big industries. Additionally, the county must decommission inadequate septic systems to prevent sewage leakage in the bay. Here, the largest barrier is lack of funding. As Samantha already stated, the funds have already been depleted on the state level to decommission septic systems, and the cost of decommissioning local homes is very high. And so right now we are recommending that the county seek out additional funding from the EPA. Lastly, community education must be invested in to ensure the success of local fertilizer and watering regulations. Right now, many Miami communities are unaware of new regulations. So the City of Miami and community partners should create educational materials like the one we created here, underscoring the importance of compliance with seasonal fertilizer bans, highlighting the impacts of nutrient pollution on the bay, and drawing attention to local residential sustainable landscaping options. We recommend a robust public awareness campaign where materials are distributed at local farmers markets and street fairs, while tabling names and emails of potential volunteers can be collected.
As previously discussed, the jurisdictional breakdown between the city and the county really leaves us looking at nutrient management recommendations on a city level. Of the 2 of these, we have a city ordinance focusing on stormwater infrastructure and a city task force. In regards to a stormwater infrastructure ordinance, we recommend that this focuses on implementing green and gray infrastructure. And we've made this recommendation because we've seen similar successful programs, both in the neighboring city of North Bay Village and also the city of San Francisco. Additionally, there was a 2020 ordinance in the city of Miami that did expand the city building code and increase the fines for SWIP inspections. So we know that this is something that has already been discussed and that the city commission is somewhat open to. We believe that this new ordinance amending the building code would be an appropriate next step, and it would empower the city to require both that a certain percentage of new landscaping is native plants, and it would also empower the City Department of Resilience and Public Works to require things like bioswales and rain gardens and permeable pavement systems to be installed on developments that touch the public right of way. And you can see an example of this in action in the photograph on the slide, which is in San Francisco, a bioswale that was installed on a private project. Now, we also do recommend that these SWIP fines be made even harsher. However, to go along with making SWIP fines harsher, inspections should also be increased. If the SWIP fine is harsh, but you never inspect a site, you're never going to actually be causing any change to be occurring. However, we do realize this takes money. We think that hiring an additional 2 inspectors would allow the City Department of Public Works to actually enact a building code change like this. And we recommend doing so through a gas tax, which is acceptable under the Florida state statutes. We also realize that a gas tax is pretty unpopular with elected officials, so other options would be a sales tax or a tourism tax.
Although a watershed management board exists on the county level, the City of Miami would benefit from the establishment of a city nutrient management task force. The task force would serve 4 important purposes. First, to streamline communication and coordination between the county and the City of Miami. As Samantha said earlier, there are 34 different municipalities within the county, all of which may have great ideas about different ways to manage nutrient pollution, and vice versa. We as a city also may have some ideas. So it's really important to be able to have streamlined communication to communicate that, as well as ensure that the responsibilities that overlap between the city and county are taken care of. Second, the second purpose is to establish a body that is tasked with ensuring all local nutrient pollution monitoring and management projects are completed. So as Samantha also mentioned, there are a variety of different projects that could be implemented, and it's important to ensure that there's a designated body to oversee these projects and ensure that they're completed. Additionally, some of these projects could be implemented by local organizations, and so we want to make sure that they have the support that they need in completing the project and answering any questions. Additionally, we want to formalize stakeholder involvement with this proposed task force. Because big industry has such a stranglehold on politics in the city, we want to formalize the power of communities by ensuring stakeholders have voting power on the task force. We also see this as an important safeguard against climate gentrification and greenwashing. Fourth is to raise public awareness about nutrient pollution's impact on the Bay, specifically regarding the fertilizer ban, and additionally educating our communities about the recent fish kills, and again, building a stronger local volunteer force. This model has been successful in other municipalities across the country, namely in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Boston, Massachusetts. We recommend the task force is composed of leaders from sovereign tribal nations, community-based organizations, scientists, and communications professionals who together provide geographic, economic, and racial diversity from across the city. With the prize money, our team plans to provide our policy recommendations and research to several community partners and local government officials. We intend to work with local community organizations to draft a city stormwater infrastructure ordinance. Additionally, we plan to develop refrigerator magnets and informational brochures to raise awareness about the recent fish kills and fertilizer ban, as I mentioned before. We will distribute materials at the Coconut Grove Farmers Market and other local street markets. And lastly, we propose hosting an on-campus discussion regarding nutrient pollution, the Bay, and future nutrient management projects. We plan to present our research there and invite Chief Bay Officer Irela Bagay, organizations like Miami Waterkeeper, and members of the University of Miami faculty to sit on the panel.
In conclusion, a combination of enforcement measures, infrastructure changes, and public awareness campaigns are vital to ensure a cleaner future for the Biscayne Bay and its surrounding communities. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for starting with the land acknowledgement. Really appreciated that. One just tiny clarification question. Could you talked about native plants a couple of times. Could you just connect the dots on why you see that as a relevant factor for nutrient management?
Definitely, I can take that question. So native plants, especially in Florida, there has been a large body of research done on it by the University of Florida, don't really require fertilizer to grow. They thrive very well here in the local climate. So by changing most of the plants, especially in public areas, to native plants, we could be reducing the amount of fertilizer used, just like from government upkeep of, the local small landscaping you see significantly.
Thank you for your presentation. I have several questions, but I'll just start with one about. I really like the idea of the community task force, and you've clearly put a lot of thought into how it would be composed and the different stakeholders involved. There have been task force before to try and address nutrient pollution. One of the most well-known is in the Mississippi River Basin. There's the hypoxia task force. And the goal for that task force is to try and limit the size of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico to 5,000 square kilometers and over a 5-year period average. And they're like 3 times over that size. It's about the size of New Jersey every year, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And so obviously these are 2 very different types of problems in some ways in terms of scale and stakeholders, but I'm just wondering if you could speak a bit more to how the structure and proposed composition of the task force might avoid some of the pitfalls that previous task forces have faced.
So our task force, again, it would be working in, I guess, parallel to the other existing structures that exist on the different other levels of government. So like I mentioned, the county task force. So again, I think that one of the strengths of our task force is making sure communication is clear, actually overseeing projects. So not just being, hands off with the projects that are existing. They are actually monitoring and setting goals to make sure that a certain amount of projects are completed and that we are actually holding the larger industries accountable for their contributions to this problem. So additionally, with the stakeholders, like I said, they would have voting power. And as you noticed, there actually isn't any industry representation on this task force. So that way the task force itself doesn't have to deal with some of the issues that exist, political issues that exist with having to, bend over backwards to make sure that industry is okay with the plans.
So that seems very wise in terms of the task force itself being able to reach consensus and make decisions. But does it hinder the ability of the task force to, get kind of broader buy-in into what it's trying to do?
That's a good question. I think that for us, specifically for the city of Miami, we are one of the counties most directly impacted by what happens. Cities most impacted with what happens in the Bay. And so I think it's important that there is that strength in not allowing industry to take over the task force. But then again, because there is more communication and some collaboration with industry on the county level, I think that kind of gives us space as a city to actually operate the task force and make sure our projects are being implemented. Again, with the stakeholder involvement and ensuring that communities also have the ability to build their own projects, we don't necessarily have to deal with a lot of the chokeholds that would exist with industry involvement.
Can you talk a little bit about the intersectionality between nutrient management issues in Miami and climate change issues in Miami?
Inteba, would you like to take this one?
Sure. Okay. So for the intersection, obviously there's sea level rise is a huge issue for us here. And on the city level, there is a climate resilience committee that Samantha mentioned earlier in our government structure section. And so that body already exists, and they are focused on sea level rise and its impact on waterfront communities. Additionally, again, with our proposal, we are focused, our proposal specifically with nutrient management, because there's so many different climate change issues for us here locally. We see it as important to have a devoted body specifically to nutrient management pollution. Additionally, with climate change issues, again, the tourism industry, cruise ships also pollute the water here locally. So, these issues definitely intersect, and that's why we see it important to have a specific body tasked with our issues, that it can increase communication with the county and also other departments within the city structure.
So am I right in thinking, though, that sea level rise is going to make nutrient management problems worse?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And as Jordan had pointed out in the presentation, the water flow through southern Florida has been greatly changed from its natural state because of these man-made canals. And so with the water level rising, I think 1 to 3 feet in the next 100 years, the elevation of the city of Miami is 4 feet. A lot of the local buildings here are now being built with blow-away first floors, so that the first floors are just expected to not even be usable in the projected future, which is terrifying. And as you were pointing out, the type of development and building going on right now to take advantage of this tourism and economic boom is directly contributing to gentrification, and a lot of people that are left in a lot of the lower lying areas with no protection tend to be lower income communities and communities of color. So you're right, not only is this a nutrient pollution is going to be getting worse as climate change gets worse, but this specifically is going to be harming lower income communities and communities of color.
Might I also add too, there's another level of complexity when it comes to climate gentrification here. Additionally, a lot of Black and Brown communities live in higher elevation areas too. And so now there's also internal displacement happening because of climate gentrification. Areas like Little Haiti now are seeing a boom in development, which, in turn impacts those communities, increases rent, and, it increases demand for housing in higher level parts of the city. So that's, again, why we think it's really important for this task force to represent stakeholders, because these communities have been disinvested in until until climate change and sea level rise became urgent and more omnipresent here. So again, that's kind of why we're want to formalize stakeholder involvement, because there's all of these issues that intersect, that impact the projects, and also historically communities have been left out.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the climate gentrification, but you answered that very well. But you also mentioned greenwashing, and so I'm curious what particular form of greenwashing is occurring here. And then 2 other questions. One is, I think Samantha mentioned stormwater ordinances so that you could require the bioswales. Can you flesh that out a little more? Which is that coming from a proposed state authority, or is that coming from county or city authority? And then also, I think, can you expand a little bit on fertilizer reduction from agricultural sources?
Definitely. how about I start with the Stormwater Ordinance, and then I'll talk about agriculture, and then we can circle back to Ntebo about greenwashing.
Perfect.
That sounds good. So talking about the Stormwater Infrastructure Ordinance, this would be coming from a city level. So the Department of Resilience and Public Works in Miami regulates all of the sidewalks and the roads that are local roads. Like I said, there's a weird breakdown between who has what road, but most of the roads that you would see and walk on in the city are regulated on the city level. And so when we are looking at things like rain gardens and bioswales, that is the department of the city that we are really talking to, and that's not really managed by the county at all, except, of course, where the county touches the sewer system, because the county does have that sanitary sewer system. So they do get a little bit of a say of what runs under the streets. But when we're looking at something like a bioswale or a rain garden, especially in a place like Miami, where you really can't dig very deep because there is water right under the ground level, we're going to be looking primarily at the city legislation. And so we did actually reach out to the city of Miami, and we obtained their codes for sidewalks. And so I looked at the concrete strength in their codes, and the current state of permeable concrete is not strong enough to meet city building codes as they stand right now, to just replace all of the sidewalks with one of, like, the new type of concrete, because you can have new tech in concrete is permeable concrete. So it's not quite there yet, but like said, in the city of San Francisco, they've tackled this by allowing the city public works department, as part of those sidewalk plans, to mandate that developers put in these rain garden and bioswale projects. And that's really because when you have a project that touches the public right of way, typically a developer is going to be renting some city street space to be parking trucks and everything. And when they do that, and when they're tearing up the city sidewalk, the city will require already that they redo the entire sidewalk. So it falls on a private developer already to be paying for the concrete to remake the sidewalk that they destroyed. So the next step here, which is what we would like to propose in this ordinance, is to do what the city of San Francisco does and say, no, not only do you have to put my concrete back, you also need to add in this natural filtration system. Let's see, that was the first question. Your next question was about agricultural fertilizer. So in regards to agricultural fertilizer, this is actually pretty interesting. Do you mind if I share my screen again so I can go back to the map? Let's see. Ooh, that's Home Depot. That's not where we're going. Do y'all see it now? Okay. So here we are. So you can see on this map that we have two yellow circles. So our agricultural areas that are closest to the Biscayne Bay are near Lake Okeechobee, which is that northernmost yellow circle, and then the southernmost circle, which is an area called Homestead, which is kind of southwest of Miami. Now, because of this redirected flow, where are we? Here we are. You can see that all of the water flow here has been significantly changed by these man-made canals. So a lot of the water, Lake Okeechobee, which is essentially where that big water pool is in the map, is really, really polluted, specifically with nutrient pollution and nitrogen and phosphorus. However, because of these man-made canals, that water doesn't really come down to our area anymore. Most of that water is redirected, well, as you can see in the map, to the east and the west. You do have some water that comes down from the polluted lake, but that is why our Everglades restoration projects are really important. And we spoke with a member at the Everglades Law Center, and she said that the most recent tests that we've seen from this are actually showing that the Everglades is doing its job and the water is relatively clean that's coming through the Everglades. So now really the water that we're concerned about is the water that's coming from that southernmost tip area in Homestead. But once again, first of all, there is some wetlands in between Miami and Homestead that does help to naturally filter it. And from what they can tell, it is not as big of a concern in the Miami area for nutrient pollution. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Awesome.
And then to answer your question about greenwashing, greenwashing, so far, we've seen some examples of greenwashing when it comes to the fertilizer ban and big industries claiming, to do something, but really aren't doing too much because with the fertilizer ban, there's a carve out for them that basically doesn't hold them up to the same standards as residents, basically, with the fertilizer ban. Additionally, I don't mean to be repetitive, but I think for the city task force that we're proposing, again, having stakeholders involved in overseeing what projects communities and companies and such are proposing helps safeguard against protecting the environment and water as a means to actually destroy communities and displace people in communities like the West Grove and also in Little Haiti.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate your attention to nutrient reduction efforts, kind of coupled with the management efforts. Was wondering if you could expand a little bit about kind of the existing fertilizer ban for commercial applicators, and it sounds like maybe there needs to be more enforcement in that area. Is your sense that the enforcement, the problem is just infrequency of inspection, or that the kind of accountability or enforcement mechanism is not as strong or robust as it should be? What are the changes that would really make enforcement something that's actually meaningful? Because it seems like the commercial applicators might be a big source of the existing fertilizer, and so better enforcement could have a substantial change. I'm curious if you could just expand on that.
I can start, and Samantha, if you wanted to finish off. So yeah, that's definitely one of the larger issues, is that right now the current ban doesn't really hold the commercial applicators accountable, because a large portion of the grass that they use, like golf courses and the tourism industry more generally, they're not using native plants. So again, they require more fertilizer, and right now the way the fertilizer ban is structured, it's really focused mostly on residents, and so that is a big problem when it comes to the commercial applicators. Additionally, a lot of the larger homes with larger acreage and land around it, those are mostly obviously in richer areas, and so that's why we see it as important to have more inspectors to be able to go to these places and ensure they're even following the bare minimum of the standards right now. I'll also say for the inspectors, there are some inspectors right now. However, the Chief Bay Officer specifically mentioned that it would be great to have more inspectors. And so we proposed having 2 inspectors so that the training, didn't want to overburden the county with training more inspectors so quickly, and also wanted to make sure that we're not blowing out the bank immediately by increasing the amount of people on payroll. But this is just a first step. We can obviously adjust as needed. And this seasonal fertilizer ban just ended last month here, so we'll have to see again for our next rainy season how things go. Samantha, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
I think you mainly covered it. As Ntebo was pointing out, there are specific exceptions in the current countywide fertilizer ban that carve out spaces for sports fields, which includes golf courses, but also includes like school athletic fields and football stadiums and things of that nature. It carves out spaces for agriculture. It does also carve out spaces for parks and some like local community gardens. So some of these carved out spaces, some are better actors than others. I'm trying to put it in the nicest way possible. And in addition, it does have a requirement for large applicators to get certified now. However, this is really variable. So when you are working with like a large golf course or something, the issue is actually more lack of inspection, because that's where a lot of money is coming from. So the inspectors won't focus on that. But when it also comes to, like Intevo pointed out, these really rich neighborhoods that are doing a lot of like residential landscaping on a higher amount, not every landscaper that you're going to hire is going to be recognized as an entity by the county. And if they're not recognized and registered as a business, then they're not meeting the certification requirement anyway, which, I mean, we do think that education is going to help with that. Because, I mean, when like going back to the greenwashing question, there are a lot of people from these rich areas who want to be eco-friendly, and maybe handing out magnets at a community farmers market would help to ask those questions of the people doing their landscaping, to say, are you using nitrogen-based fertilizer? Have we tested our ground for phosphorus? So I think it's coming from a lot of different angles in terms of the obstacles there.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback, so I see Katie, you've turned on video, so you're probably here to tell us that we need to wrap up. Do I have time for one more?
This is a 3-minute warning, but there is time for one more question.
Well, this was just to piggyback on Sarah's great question, which was, well, it'd be fascinating to know what proportion of all those carve-outs actually contribute to the pollution. You know, I mean, all those carve-outs that you mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if you're looking at like 3/4 of the nutrient use in the county, in the city. My question was also kind of on the enforcement angle, and I was wondering if you'd considered, in addition to the inspectors, I think that's a good idea, but whether there are other kind of bottlenecks or leverage points in the system that wouldn't require having to go around to every single establishment, every single house. You know, so I'm thinking, if there is a ban on fertilizer use, maybe there is also a ban on fertilizer sales, you know, during that time.
I can take this one. So the state of Florida makes a ban on fertilizer sales really hard, really, really hard. We brought that up actually to one of our community partners as an initial idea, and he essentially laughed at us. So that is really a state legislation issue in terms of the ban. His other point to us had been, people can get anything from the internet now. So that's why we really did focus on this enforcement aspect from the way that we did, because it was a really immediate dead end from the ban side of things. And as you mentioned about what is this quantification, the University of Miami civil engineering professor that we spoke with actually told us about a project that is currently being undertaken in coordination with FIU and the state to try and quantify, or the county, not the state, I'm sorry, to try and quantify these sources. Because you're right, one of the biggest issues in the Biscayne Bay is we know we have a huge problem. The seagrasses are dying, the fish keep dying. Every year, it's worse and worse, but we don't know really where it's coming from. There is a state level management like tracking system that really does not cover the Southern Florida area very well. When you go onto the tracking website, you can click on the little dots from all their tracking services, and it doesn't track the things it's supposed to for Southern Florida. So you're right on the money.
Also, additionally, with the volunteer force that we're thinking of right now in North Bay Village, there is a kind of a program happening right now where scientists are actually teaching locals how to do water and soil testing. And so we see that also as part of, building up a volunteer force and not just raising awareness, actually putting that to action and empowering communities to learn how to soil and water test as well. So I just wanted to share that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the University of Miami and all the presenters. So my colleague, Annie Olson, is going to usher our judges to a breakout room to engage in their deliberations. While our judges are there, I'm going to invite all of the competitors to turn their cameras on and to stay with us for a conversation. And I know we have a lot of wonderful, and poor Miami folks, if you guys want to take a 5-minute break. And I have a couple of questions and thoughts to get a conversation started, but I also know we have a really full audience here. And so I thought the first thing that I would do is to, if someone in the audience who's been listening to the presentations has a question that one of the judges didn't ask, that you'd be interested to talk to our panelists or our competitors about, just go ahead and raise your hand. And then I think you can turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And if you're here just watching, you're welcome to turn your camera on at this point. I think our judges are still here though, and we should probably wait on beginning our conversation until the judges have left.
We saw a brief thing to join breakout room.
Okay, I think the judges have disappeared unless I'm missing something. Okay, great. So if anyone who's been listening to the presentations has a question, I'd welcome. Oh, well, hello, I see a coach there. Coaches, please, everybody feel free to turn cameras on. This is just a time to have a conversation together. And let's see, I don't see any hands yet. So I'll go ahead, and I know I have a question for the competitors. And first of all, I just wanted to say, I know I started out introducing the competition by saying, gee, how intimidating, we have these incredible expert judges. But as you all were talking, it became clear to me that you all have become experts on what you're talking about as well. So that was really impressive to see. And one question I had for you is there anything that you discovered in the course of researching this problem that surprised you or concerned you, or what was something you encountered that was maybe kind of unexpected to you as you got closer to this problem? Competitors, you can go ahead and just jump right in.
I think just the scope of it. Like, I think that I had not quite really internalized just how big this problem was until we started digging and digging and digging and realized that the digging probably wouldn't stop. So it was a really cool thing to start looking into, just because I hadn't realized how deep it was.
I think also something that I was shocked about is that, especially for our project, because it incorporates multiple states, that states actually want to get this thing done. I think that when I realized that multiple states were suing the EPA, I was kind of a little shocked and taken aback by that. But I thought it was also really good that certain states kind of want to keep the regulatory agencies here accountable.
I have to ask the Baltimore folks, how much did you know about chicken litter before you started this project?
So I think when we approached the project, we were bold. Everyone in the team was at the very end. We're like, who would have thought that we would be talking about chicken poop and write an entire policy proposal, but then even also to like just understand how complicated, like not just like poultry manure, but just manure as a whole. And like the environmental implications that it has and how regulated it is. Like a lot of people think, oh, it's just manure, there's cesspools, and that's pretty much it. But there's a whole lot more than that. There's a lot of regulation, how to repurpose it, how to use it. But I don't think any of us would have thought that, hey, we're finalists and we've submitted a policy brief on chicken poop. When we explain it to our families and friends, they all laugh. But then once we tell them the policies, the statutes and the impact on that, they're kind of like, oh crap, I didn't know. I mean, no pun intended, but like, I didn't know how impactful like chicken manure is. And yeah.
Well, I know we have folks listening in who might be interested to participate in future years or coach teams in future years. And I would be curious to hear from you if you were doing it all over again, what would you have done differently? What advice would you have for law schools or law students considering tackling this competition in a future year?
We would start sooner. Our team, we joined in very last minute. I think 3 weeks until the competition was due. So I think we would start sooner.
I would just like to say, if you're a student interested in engaging in this competition, go for it. If you have an idea, if you are passionate about the project, go for it. Our whole team, our 1Ls, we had an idea. We are passionate about this topic from just our accumulated past experiences. We also put it together in 2-3 weeks. But it really gave us an opportunity to bond. We didn't really know each other that well before this. So if you're passionate and you have an idea, don't think just because you aren't necessarily an expert on all the parts or that you're not experienced enough, go for it. You never know what might happen. You might be a finalist.
Yeah, I would add,
Oh,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I don't have a science background. I have an organizing and political science background. And so if you're like, I am not a scientist, how can I do this? You can. It's all about learning and, advocating for our communities. And so I found that was great. And because Samantha and Jordan also have such strengths in engineering and ecology, that it worked out well for us too.
Also, one of the things I wanted to add, and for future students too, our team came together out of everyone was interested in entering the competition individually, but didn't know how to start. So it was just kind of announced in class, in our environmental law class. Next thing you know, it's 7 or 8 people walking together and kind of, oh, I'm interested too. And then from there, we assess everyone's strengths and weaknesses. And also too, you'll get the help. Our faculty advisor, Professor Jaya, who's on this call, connected us with a lot of support, grilled us, threw us the curveball questions. Like, we were definitely prepared. Even when we doubted ourselves, like faculty and other staff believed in us so much. So even if you're kind of dealing with imposter syndrome or you think that you're not good enough for this competition, like don't doubt yourself. There's definitely everyone in the team, I'm sure all the other competitors probably felt like that. You'll have a whole community backing you up. So definitely just jump and do it.
I wanted to add something that Gabriella mentioned, like that you get even though it's such a short period of time that we worked on it, like with our school too, like we got a good bond going now and we all like worked together well. And then I was just surprised to see how amazing like everyone in the community is. Like they dropped what they had to do at some time during those 2 to 3 weeks. We met with so many people in the community and they're all like, yeah, if you get the funding, we want to keep working with you. And they spoke to us for at least an hour each and helped share their knowledge so we could learn more about it. And I want to shout out to Teresa for being here today because she was one of our greatest helpers too. So I just want to say thank you to everybody.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because the other thing I was going to be curious about was the extent to which your teams kind of went outside your law schools, went outside the legal community to investigate this problem.
So, sorry, we were all in the same room and there was a little bit of an echo effect. I had a lot of background in this beforehand, and that's why we picked the area we did, because we did have a lot of connections. But once we came up with our idea, one of the first things we did is we emailed the companies or the organizations that do this, and we made sure it was feasible. We made sure we understood the barriers. We looked up the statutes, and we went out into the people who actually work with it to make sure we could do it before we even tried to bring it to you guys. And I think that was really, really helpful because it brought to our attention the history of it. It brought to our attention what they see as they're working through it, what the issues are.
I'd like to come off of what Jordan said and just thank Teresa. She connected us with a whole host of local advocacy groups and nonprofits. But we reached out to everybody. In Tebo, you can speak more about, you reached out to a lot of different types of community organizations. I was talking to Chesapeake Bay wastewater engineers. I was talking to construction managers in California that I had a connection with. I embarrassingly somewhat scared a stormwater county man in the Walgreens checkout line one time and asked him a lot of questions about grants that I don't think he wanted to answer at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. So we really did talk to a lot of people in the surrounding community.
I think our professor definitely towards the tail end, once we found out we were finalists, started connecting us to all like different array of community members and stakeholders. And a lot of them came reading our brief with a lot of questions. And so, I mean, nothing better than to be asked of like the questions on proposals and policy solutions that are going to affect them. And then also too, like when we combined our team, we eco-mapped ourselves. Like, what are our expertise? How many people are local within our group that understand these communities, that understand the impact? So we definitely did that as well, was not just having outside external experts and individuals talking to us and grilling us, but even acknowledging our own expertise, especially working on it, having a background, having a connection to the Eastern Shore and Maryland altogether.
I can definitely relate to that because all three of us have different backgrounds in different areas. I'm from South Florida near Miami. I know Gabriella went to Tulane, so she has expertise in that area. And Samantha went to college in Virginia and is from the local area. So it was really cool to see how from different areas in the US kind of were able to come together and make some sort of a policy solution that worked for an area that I've personally never even been to.
I also felt really, so for me, again, organizing background and coming at it from a justice lens too, I felt that it was important to reach out to different tribal communities here too. And so being able to talk with scientists within different tribal governments was really helpful, and also understanding how the water grid kind of works here. I did not know that much about water systems and how they're interconnected, and also issues of sovereignty for Indigenous communities too, how it relates to water here. And so I really am thankful for the ability to connect with community members, and also was excited to see that folks were from Maryland because I grew up in Gaithersburg and Montgomery County. So I thought it was cool to see folks in Maryland also part of this.
So I will invite now a little bit of constructive criticism or suggestions from you all, and you can provide. I have nothing to do with the judging at this point. You can be unfiltered, but this is just our second year of hosting this competition. It's a somewhat unusual structure. And so, we kind of pulled from a moot court model, but I'd be curious if there's anything about the way things were structured, if there's something that we might do or do differently that would have helped support your process better. And I'll offer one that has occurred to me in the past, which is what we require is really something that's more in the form of a legal brief submission, but it doesn't quite fit with exactly what we're asking you all to do. And so I'd be curious if there's, how did you find the requirements for the written submission? Is there anything related to that you might think would be a better fit for this competition? Or are there any other kind of suggestions you might have? Recognizing that really our goal at the end of the day is to support student learning and really to come up with good ideas that can actually help make a difference. So there's, that's the end game.
One recommendation that I'm sure the rest of my group shares is it would have been slightly nicer to have an additional week or maybe two, given that we formed our team pretty close to the deadline in order to form a team. And also given the time in the semester, we had midterms after deadline to sign up and before presentation. So we couldn't really give it our all during the time that we did have. So even just like one more week, I think would have been nicer.
And that sounds consistent with what I'm hearing a lot of teams say, to somehow stretch out the process a little bit more.
I want to add something about that too. Like, if the timelines like are gonna change like they did, like it was kind of nice that the deadline got like prolonged, but I think like there wasn't great communication. And I think maybe like when you enter the competition, like maybe there can be a mass email or something so that you guys only have to send it out one time and it goes to everyone, just like in a more organized way. I don't know.
I think having an initial kind of orientation to go over the rules would definitely be great. I know we definitely spend time amongst our team going through the rules, like, all right, we have this, these are our deadlines, these are our parameters, these are our constraints. Definitely having some sort of orientation style. That way, in case we do have any questions, because a lot of them were kind of like, let's err on the side of cautions and stick to the rules. But for all we know, orientation could probably address or expand more on these rules than we may. That could have probably allowed us to become more flexible, more creative with our policy proposals.
Okay, that's a wonderful idea, to hold a Zoom orientation for registrants early on, to provide, a not that kind of formal submit a question, but just a kind of a conversation about that's. Thank you. This is all very helpful. I appreciate you giving us your thoughts.
Kind of something positive where we're talking about needing more time to write it. I do think it was a really good thing that the registration was later in the month of September instead of early, because I mean, I know that there are a handful of 1Ls on this call, and a month before we did this, I would not have been able to commit to this. Honestly, a week before we did this, I probably wouldn't have been able to commit to it. So I think it's really good that it was pushed back, or it was like later deadline.
I also found the website really helpful, like to be able to go to like one website to get a lot of the information, and also to be able to see how like this part of the oral presentations were structured last year. Like it was helpful to be able to see that on the website.
Sorry, I had an urgent question from the judging breakout room. All right, so I'd welcome, I know we've got folks who are watching, if people have questions for the participants, or if anyone has thoughts for the problem for next year, which is what we're turning our minds to now.
Toxic waste. So like not like nuclear waste, like old gas station, like contaminated soil waste.
Ernesto, did I see your hand up?
I would definitely say something around climate change, and kind of like thinking globally, acting locally. Like, I mean, over the last couple of weeks, we've had COP26 happening at Glasgow. So bringing something that's on the international stage and just seeing how it impacts and how it can be connected to like local communities. Like, for example, when we talk about climate change, we think of the ice caps and the polar bears, but we don't think about 6-7 degrees in temperature increase in Tucson, Arizona. And that's a big climate change issue, but we don't always understand or find the connection between something very, very big on a large scale, how it could be impactful in our own neighborhoods.
So I have to ask this just because I'm really curious. I heard a number of you mention that you're 1L students, and I presume then you had not taken environmental law yet. So how on earth did you get your head around the TMDL program if you haven't taken environmental law? That is truly impressive. I mean, I find that even for 2Ls in an environmental law course, to explain that program is a challenge.
Yeah, so for me personally, I was very lucky. I went to the University of Maryland for undergrad as well, and I was a sustainability minor. And I did a lot of work, especially in the classroom, on TMDLs and understanding that. And we had a great intern for our day program at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So kind of having that little extra background about the Clean Water Act, and then even my own research. I think that the EPA website, along with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation website, was really integral into my understanding of TMDLs, and just kind of talking with our awesome coach, Professor Piermate. He helped me a lot, just kind of in the general understanding of the NIPDES program and how everything kind of interlocks with each other. So yeah.
I was also fortunate to be able to take an environmental law class during my master's degree last year. So before I even stepped foot in Maryland law, I had a law class under my belt. So it was a class that wasn't just a Clean Water Act. It covered several different statutes, but that just helped me get a little bit more familiar with the policy process. And I think just sparked my interest when I heard about nutrient pollution and the issue we had this year.
And then I worked with the agriculturalists in the area on my undergraduate thesis on livestock exclusion policy and in nutrient management and environmental management. So we talked a lot about the TMDL then, and then we were able to pull it all together with the background that my colleagues had.
So I'd be curious, in light of the research you've all done now, how optimistic or pessimistic you are about our ability to effectively address nutrient pollution. Like, if I was going to fast forward and we were sitting
from
here,
our perspective, I think we all got really optimistic about it, seeing how the policy ideas that we had didn't have these gigantic barriers. It was more just got to convince someone to reframe the way they look at it. And I think we've absolutely felt like it was way more achievable from our perspective in our geographic area, just by encouraging different BMPs in different ways.
For me, it was definitely a bit of both. I am optimistic that there are a lot of things that can be done. I am pessimistic when you look at the numbers about just legacy phosphorus and legacy nutrients that are in the water system already. That definitely put it in a very realistic perspective, which is why we discussed management of nutrients in the system as well, because at least here in Florida, it's a big problem.
I think with our group, we're definitely optimistic. I mean, when we look at our policy proposals, they may look like low-hanging fruit because we're already working on a current infrastructure already in place. But there's nothing better than taking something that's kind of already working and taking it to the next level and just kind of like strengthening that infrastructure, bringing in more funding. It's really like that small little victories that you could just like have a larger impact on it. So we're definitely optimistic.
I would also say,
we were certainly optimistic about some of the small, as you said, victories that we proposed. However, at all times, we are keeping in mind those that would be impacted by the regulation. And it was at the forefront of our thought process that we can't forget about the producers and the farmers, and we have to work hand in hand with those that the regulations are actually going to impact.
I would also say, just throughout this process, I do have a scientific background. So from that perspective, it's pretty easy to get caught up in so many things and make this situation so difficult and so entrenched in so many elements of our everyday lives. But I think throughout this process and this project and really speaking with people in this area, it's really good to see that people want solutions. People want to think positive, because if people are focusing on how something's not possible, then nothing will ever get done. So I think it's really good that we all were able to do this, and that is really encouraged, especially at least at Maryland Law and the environmental community, that we just have to find solutions and keep pushing, because otherwise, how else will it change?
I just wanted to say something regarding the prompt too. I really appreciated the freedom that we had to pick like whatever location we wanted, because that allowed like our presentations to be a lot different than each other, and that helped like with the creativity factor. And I just wanted to put out an idea for next year, maybe after doing with plastic reduction, because almost half of all plastic ever manufactured has been made since 2000, and microplastics are a huge growing concern right now in the country, especially.
I'm curious, it sounds like none of you participated in the competition as part of a course. I know last year there was a school that structured participation. Would that have been something, do you think that would have been helpful to you if for example, this had been offered as a 2L course you could enroll in and you would have gotten credit for participation?
That would have been awesome.
I think that would have been helpful. But particularly to my group, because we're all 1Ls, I think that it would have kind of disincentivized us from participating, because it would have been in our minds, oh, this is a 2L thing rather than a 1L thing. I know in the beginning, our group went up to Professor Piermate and was like, oh, we're 1Ls, can we still do this? And he's like, yes, do it. Like, doesn't matter. So I think that it would definitely incentivize the upper class, the 2Ls and 3Ls, but for 1Ls, I don't think it would incentivize them as much.
On that note, as 1Ls, we can't choose our classes, so we wouldn't be able to like come in and decide we wanted to do it. And like I was talking about earlier, even if they sent us an email over the summer saying, oh, you could take this class and do this thing, if we don't know the problem, if we're overwhelmed, like I don't think we would have committed to it if we hadn't been in school for at least a few weeks.
And at our school, we're actually allowed to pick one elective in the spring, and one of the choices is environmental law, actually with Professor Alley. So definitely, like if we did it like through her class for an extra credit, like maybe just one extra credit. I am a 2L, and so I probably wouldn't have added on like a whole like big class, but maybe if it was just one credit, like it would have been helpful, because I definitely did sacrifice. I got a little bit behind in some of my other stuff to work on this. But I also think maybe I would have worked on it even more if I was getting a credit for it.
That's a really interesting idea. One credit add-on to an environmental law course. That's something I will roll around in my head, because what we're considering doing is when we announce the problem for next year, first of all, hoping to announce the problem earlier to give everyone a little more, students and faculty a little more lead time, but also to maybe send out a proposal for here's a draft syllabus. Here's how, if you wanted to offer this as a course, you might. And that had never occurred to me, the idea of offering it as a one credit add-on to an existing environmental law course, although that would make a lot of sense. Oh, Bill, you sound kind of funny. You sound like Mickey Mouse for some reason. To me, is it just me? Oh, wait.
We're letting him know right now.
Okay.
At least he's not a cat, so we could say that. I think I could add, well, we do have our environmental law professor, who's our faculty advisor in this call. I think for us, it just happened to be happenstance that as we signed up for the competition, we were talking about CAFOs in class. So we kind of didn't come into the competition as like blindsided or anything like that. I could see the benefit of it being kind of like taught like a seminar style, where especially for individuals who are curious about like entering competitions, how to go about it. And then also too, like our professor was very proactive in announcing this kind of like early on in the semester, like, hey, there's this competition. If you all are interested, I'm more than happy to help. So, so yeah, it could be like a combination of both seminar style, but then also like notifying and letting faculty know so that they can announce it to like their students.
Well, I see, I see we're having a reaction. Some professors do not want another course added to their teaching load. I see that our judges have returned. So I think I'll turn the floor over to our judges to announce their decision. And once the judges have announced our winning team, I think we're going to show you all the award. It's a handcrafted award that will be sent. And then I'll offer some concluding remarks. So I'll turn the floor over to our judges.
Okay, so first of all, we want to just applaud the extraordinary efforts that all three teams put into their presentations today. We were very impressed with the presentations, with the research that everybody did, and it was really exciting to see your ideas. Also, just sort of particularly impressed with the quality of clarity and explanation on complicated statutory schemes like the Clean Water Act, particularly from those of you who are 1Ls and have not taken environmental law yet. So I just want to acknowledge everybody's hard work in putting these presentations together. I'm very excited to announce that the consensus of the judges is the winner of the competition today is the team from Miami. And I can just say a few words about what we liked about your presentation. So first, and I think this is really first for me most significantly, we were really excited to see the ambitiousness of the proposal in addressing reduction of sources of contamination, as well as looking at some mitigation strategies for the contamination that's already in the system. We were also really impressed with the integration in a very meaningful way of equity issues that showed up both in the presentation and in a lot of the discussion in the Q&A. The quality of the visuals was really excellent. We found some of the diagrams, particularly the chart where you broke down what is within the jurisdiction of the city versus what is within the jurisdiction of the county, to be incredibly helpful in understanding kind of why you were focusing on what you were focusing on. The hydrology flow chart was similarly very helpful, and we particularly liked the way that you came back to that in responding to the question about, why you were not talking as much about agricultural contamination. We also really liked the way that you showed your work, the list at the beginning of the presentation on all of the people that you had spoken to, and you referred back to so many of them throughout the presentation and also in the Q&A. So you were telling us kind of not what you thought, but really what you had learned from these experts that you had reached out to. So that was really impressive. I think those were the main bullet points. Do any of the other judges want to add anything?
I would just say yes. Congratulations. And as someone, so my background, my undergraduate degree, as you can hear, I'm half English at least, and my undergraduate degree was in chemistry and law, and so I've always been interested in that science policy interface, and the fact that you had kind of an interdisciplinary group and used that training to combine it with the law was also exciting. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I'll just add that all three groups were terrific, and I want to underscore what Margot said. The Clean Water Act, even for those of us who've been litigating in the area for decades, can throw curveballs. And the jurisdictional complications in every way, the interplay between point and non-point sources is very complicated. The interplay between regulatory mandates and incentives is complicated. And all three of you wrestled with that and came up with some very good and clear responses. So you all deserve a great deal of credit. And all the presentations were really terrific. And I think all of us enjoyed all of them. It was and it's a Friday afternoon, the week before Thanksgiving. So that's saying a lot. But also in terms of the winning team, I think you answered the question very, very well. You both clearly listened to our questions and worked with among yourselves as a team to make sure that the question was fully answered. And that both gave us confidence and in that you were answering and listening, and also a great sense of teamwork that you were working together, which was very nice. I liked the level of detail, which was very helpful. Again, to suggest even when the detail wasn't all presented, some of it was in your brief, that clearly indicated there was a lot of solid thinking behind what might have been a higher level statement. So congratulations to the winning team and to the other teams as well. You all did a terrific job.
I'll be very quick and just add that as kind of a first-time judge in seeing this competition, it's wonderful to see the enthusiasm and the creativity that so many students, and as Professor Pollins mentioned, especially 1Ls, have in being willing to grapple with really complex problems that continue to thwart experienced litigators in this area. I appreciate your kind of attention to the small bite-sized pieces of the problem, as well as willingness to think about how to really transform the systems that we have to make the kind of change we need. And I just want to encourage you all to please continue to maintain that enthusiasm. I hope you will take it with you into your careers. It's wonderful to see.
I think one of my colleagues may have an award to show. Annie Achinthi, did you want to do that before we finish?
Yes, if you just bear with us one moment.
So we will be follow up with all of the teams. Our winners will get our handcrafted environmental law and policy hack trophy. And I will just close again by thanking all of the participants for your energy, creativity. This was really exciting to hear, and thank all of our judges for donating their expertise and time. And just remind everyone, we'll be doing this again next year, and also remind you that the requirement is there be 2 law students on a team, but otherwise teams can include anyone. So you can go out and find scientists, you can go out and find students from other disciplines to join your teams if you like. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for participating.
And thank you, Katie, for organizing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Congratulations.
Bye.
Good job.